Julia Reed sat at the end of the estate attorney's table while her brother and sister divided their grandfather's farm between them. Eric had brought a yellow legal pad. He'd already drawn a line down the middle and written farm operations on one side and sale options on the other. Caitlin kept checking the time on her phone, though she'd been the one who asked for the meeting. Their grandfather, Benjamin Reed, had been dead for 3 weeks. His work jacket still hung inside the farmhouse mudroom. His reading glasses were still on the table beside his chair. Yet Eric was talking about the farm's milking equipment as if it had belonged to nobody in particular. "The operating lease covers maintenance," he said. "That's why the farm needs to stay intact." "It covers normal maintenance," Caitlin said. "Not a roof, not a new compressor, and not whatever happens next. We should sell while the place is producing. A buyer will cut it up. A buyer will pay us." They looked at each other, not Julia. They had been doing that since the funeral, arguing across her as though she were an empty chair. The estate attorney rested both hands on a folder. "Before we go further, all three of you need to understand what this agreement does. Your grandfather's will allows a family division if all the heirs consent. Eric and Caitlin would receive the farm parcel together. Julia would receive the separate parcel on Martling Road." "The depot," Julia said. Caitlin gave her a careful smile. "Yes." Nobody called it the Reed Milk Depot, unless they were remembering what it had once been. For years, it had been the old depot, the closed depot, or that building on Martling Road. At the funeral, one of Benjamin's former neighbors had called it a shame, and then changed the subject. The attorney slid a photograph across the table. It showed a low brick building with 2 loading bays, a flat metal awning, and weeds growing through the concrete. One gutter had pulled loose. The sign over the office was missing 3 letters. Julia had seen it 4 days earlier from her car. She hadn't gone inside. The parcel includes the depot building, the rear cooling platform, and the caretaker apartment, the attorney said. It also includes all attached equipment and responsibility for existing violations. Eric leaned back, "Which is why it shouldn't stay tied to the farm." Julia looked at him. "You mean tied to you? I mean, the farm can't absorb another liability." Caitlin lowered her phone. "Nobody's trying to dump anything on you, Julia." That was exactly what they were doing, but they wanted it done politely. The farm was nearly 200 acres of pasture, barns, working sheds, and the house where Benjamin had lived. A neighboring dairy operator had already offered Eric a long lease with enough money to keep the farm intact without Eric doing the daily work. Caitlin wanted a sale because a sale ended phone calls, repair bills, and shared decisions. The depot had a leaking roof, disconnected electrical service, an old refrigeration room, and a sanitation notice fixed to its side door. Julia had been offered the freedom to own all of that by herself. "What happens if I don't sign?" she asked. Eric's pen stopped. The attorney answered. "Then the division in the will remains unresolved. The properties stay in the estate while the 3 of you decide whether to sell, divide, or request court supervision." "And the farm lease waits," Julia said. "Yes." Caitlin rubbed one thumb over the edge of her phone case. She had expected Julia to sign quickly. Eric had expected it too. He understood Julia's bank account better than he understood her, and he knew she couldn't carry farm expenses for long. "We've been over this," he said. "The depot is the only clean way to separate everything." Julia almost laughed at the word clean. The sanitation notice gave the property owner 60 days from the transfer date to restore basic service and pass an inspection if the building was going to retain its operating use. Otherwise, the county would classify it as storage. The old cooling equipment would have to be drained or removed. The loading area would have to be secured. None of that sounded cheap. The attorney had warned them that the depot's current value was uncertain. He'd also told Julia she could have the agreement reviewed by another lawyer. Eric called that an unnecessary expense. Caitlin said it would only drag things out. Now they were both waiting for their youngest sister to make their lives easier. Julia was 27, 12 years younger than Eric, and 7 younger than Caitlin. That gap had shaped most family decisions. Eric was old enough to remember their parents bringing Julia home. Caitlin was old enough to remember being annoyed by it. By the time Julia had opinions anyone noticed, her brother and sister had already learned to treat those opinions as delays. Benjamin hadn't. When Julia was in her early 20s and changing jobs more often than Eric approved of, Benjamin took her to the depot on Saturday mornings. The public counter had already closed. Most of the building sat quiet, but he still checked switches, wrote readings in a narrow black book, and walked the loading floor with a flashlight. He taught her how to mark a delivery sheet so the next person didn't have to guess. He showed her that a driver losing 10 minutes at every stop lost more than time by the end of a route. He made her carry a ring of depot keys until she could choose the right one in the dark. People think logistics means moving things, he'd told her once. Mostly it means being ready when something arrives. At the time, Julia thought he was helping her prepare for an office job. She'd used what he taught her at a regional supply warehouse outside Albertville. Benjamin had seemed pleased, though he never said so directly. Now the warehouse had cut her hours, her rent was due in 9 days, and the building he'd taught her in had become her share of the family. Caitlin pushed the agreement closer. The farm is going to cause fights between Eric and me for years. You'd be out of that. That's meant to make this sound better. I'm being honest. No, you're being selective. Eric set down his pen. What do you want, Julia? It was the first direct question he'd asked her that morning. She looked at the photograph again. The office windows were clouded from inside. A cable hung near one loading bay. Above the roofline, the old steel vent stood straight despite everything around it. What equipment is attached? She asked. Eric glanced at the attorney. The attorney opened another page. The inventory lists the refrigeration units, transfer lines, loading controls, a route controller, office fixtures, and a backup generator that hasn't been tested. A route controller for what? Caitlin asked. Old dispatch equipment, Eric said. Grandpa never threw anything away. Julia looked at him. Have you been inside? Last year? Did you test it? No. Why would I? He sounded irritated because he didn't have an answer, not because the question was foolish. The attorney tapped the agreement. I need to be clear. Attached equipment transfers with the depot parcel. I'm not making any statement about whether it works or has value. I understand, Julia said. Eric picked up his pen again. He mistook her answer for surrender. Julia read the family agreement from the beginning. It took 12 minutes. Neither sibling stayed quiet for all 12. Caitlin explained that the farmhouse needed insurance. Eric pointed out that the prospective lessee wanted an answer by Friday. Caitlin said Julia wouldn't need to coordinate decisions with them once the transfer was complete. That last part mattered more than Caitlin intended. Julia signed. Eric released a breath through his nose. Caitlin reached across and touched Julia's wrist. You won't regret being out of the farm mess, she said. Julia pulled her hand back to turn the final page. You don't know what I'll regret. The attorney gathered the papers. He gave Eric and Caitlin copies of the farm documents. Then he placed a thick envelope in front of Julia. Inside were the depot inventory, the sanitation notice, a temporary insurance binder, and the probate deed that would be recorded after the agreement was approved. At the bottom lay 2 key rings. One held 3 newer keys with plastic tags. The other held 9 old brass keys worn smooth around their teeth. Julia lifted the second ring. A flat metal tag was wired to it. Someone had stamped 4 words into the tag by hand. Martling, office, bay, flat. Benjamin's lettering appeared underneath in black marker, faded but still readable. Keep these in order. Eric was already stacking his folders. You'll want to get somebody out there before the next rain. Did the roof leak when you went in last year? Back corner of the office. Anywhere else? I didn't inspect it. You just said it was a liability. It is. But you didn't inspect it. Eric looked toward Caitlin, asking without words for help. Caitlin stood and slipped her phone into her bag. We all have enough going on today. Julia closed the envelope. Apparently. Outside, Eric and Caitlin walked together toward the parking lot. They stopped beside Eric's truck and began another low conversation about the lease. Julia watched them through the attorney's front window. Neither looked back. By noon, she was driving east through Albertville with the depot keys on the passenger seat. Martling Road ran past feed stores, repair yards, pasture, and houses set far enough from the pavement to collect dust instead of traffic noise. The depot stood beyond a shallow drainage ditch. Its cracked sign was visible through 2 pecan trees. Julia pulled onto the concrete apron and shut off the engine. For a moment, she stayed in the car. The building looked worse up close. Rust streaked the loading awning. One office pane was broken and covered from inside with something brown. The gutter Eric had mentioned was hanging by a single bracket. Water had carved a dark line down the brick. The sanitation notice was still fixed to the side door in a plastic sleeve. Julia carried the envelope over and read it again. The clock wouldn't begin until the deed transferred, but once it did, she would have 60 days. Restore electrical service, secure the loading area, clean the refrigeration surfaces, submit to inspection. She unlocked the side door with the third brass key. The smell met her first. Wet cardboard, old metal, dust, and something sour left in a floor drain. She found the switch just inside. Nothing happened. The office had 2 desks, a dented filing cabinet, and a wall calendar still open to October of the previous year. The brown covering over the broken window was Benjamin's old raincoat, nailed across the frame. That bothered her more than the damage. She took it down carefully and folded it over the back of a chair. Beyond the office, the loading room opened wide and dim. Transfer pipes ran along one wall. Yellow numbers had been painted above the bay doors. A row of control boxes sat beside the refrigeration room, each coated in gray dust. One box was different. It had a small dark display, a telephone cord, and 7 square route buttons. The last button still carried a strip of white tape with a handwritten number, 7. Julia wiped the display with her sleeve. Nothing lit. Below it, a narrow drawer stood open by half an inch. She pulled it out. It was empty except for a pencil and a round coffee stain. From somewhere near the back wall came a steady drop of water. Julia followed it into the caretaker apartment. The place had 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and a bathroom with pale green tile. Water dripped beneath the sink and spread across the cabinet floor. She found the shut-off valve. It wouldn't move. Julia set down her keys, braced one hand against the pipe, and tried again. The valve turned with a dry squeal. The dripping slowed, then stopped. It was a tiny thing. The cabinet was still swollen. The pipe still needed repair, and the whole apartment smelled closed up. But the water had stopped because she'd stopped it. She stood and looked through the kitchen doorway toward the depot floor. Her siblings had taken the barns, the pasture, the farmhouse, and the lease they were already arguing over. They had left her a dead building with a deadline. Julia went back to her car, opened the trunk, and took out the work gloves Benjamin had given her years ago. Then she returned to the office, found an old push broom behind the filing cabinet, and began clearing a path to the root controller. Dust rolled ahead of the broom in soft gray folds. Julia pushed it around a stack of milk crates and found a painted line on the concrete. Blue once, nearly black now, it ran from the office door to the loading platform. Benjamin had taught her to keep that line clear. "Doesn't matter if nobody's coming today," he'd said. "You don't pile tomorrow's trouble in today's walkway." She moved the crates against the wall. Her phone rang from the office. Eric's name filled the screen. "You still at the depot?" he asked. "Yes." "Did you find the water shutoff?" "I found one under the apartment sink." "That's not the main, I know." He paused. He hadn't expected that answer. "The main should be behind the refrigeration room," he said. "Grandpa showed me years ago. Is it marked?" "I don't remember. Listen, we're meeting the lease operator at the farm tomorrow morning. Caitlin wants to start sorting Grandpa's personal things while we're there." Julia rested the broom against the desk. "Tomorrow morning, when?" 8. "I need to work here. It won't take all day." It never took all day when Eric wanted help. It took however long he needed, and then Julia drove home with the part of her day that remained. "What are we sorting?" she asked. "Clothes, papers, kitchen stuff. We can't leave the house frozen in place." 3 weeks wasn't frozen in place to Julia. It was barely long enough for Benjamin's work jacket to stop holding the shape of his shoulders. "Can't you and Caitlin do it?" "We can, but you'll want to say." There it was. Not a request. If she came, she was useful. If she didn't, she was choosing not to belong. Julia looked through the office window at the cracked loading floor. "I'll be there at 8, she said. "Good. Bring boxes if you have any." The call ended before she could answer. She stood with the phone in her hand. Then she opened the family message thread. Caitlin had sent 6 messages since the meeting. 4 were photographs of items from the farmhouse: a glass bowl, Benjamin's old radio, a set of chipped dinner plates, his recliner. "Does anyone want these?" Eric had replied to the radio. Caitlin had marked the recliner for donation. Julia typed, "Please don't move Grandpa's work jacket." 3 dots appeared, vanished, then appeared again. "Of course not," Caitlin wrote. "I figured you'd want it." Julia should have felt relieved. Instead, she wondered why Caitlin had figured that. Because Julia had spent more time with Benjamin near the end? Because the jacket had no sale value? Because giving it to her solved one more small problem? She put the phone away and returned to the loading room. Behind the refrigeration room, she found 3 valves in a maze of old pipe. None were labeled as the main. One was green with corrosion, another had been wrapped with a red cloth strip. The third had a metal tag tied around its stem. Benjamin had scratched main water into it. Julia touched the letters with one gloved finger. Eric had known the general location. Benjamin had left the exact answer. She turned the valve until it stopped. Then she went outside and checked the meter beside the road. The small leak indicator held still. That was the first thing in the building she could call settled. She spent another hour sweeping. Under the loading platform, she found 2 unbroken fluorescent tubes in cardboard sleeves. One office drawer held spare fuses, a roll of electrical tape, and 3 sharpened pencils secured with a rubber band. A clipboard hung beside the root controller. Its paper had been removed, but the metal clip still opened cleanly. Nothing she found was valuable. Everything had been placed where a working person might need it. At the back of the office, a narrow door led to a storage closet. The first 2 keys didn't fit. The 4th key entered halfway and stopped. Julia knelt to look at the lock. Someone had broken the tip of a key inside it. She could see the metal shard. For 10 minutes, she worked at it with tweezers from the apartment bathroom. The shard slipped twice. The 3rd time, it came free. The 5th brass key opened the door. Inside stood a ladder, 2 mop buckets, a hand truck, and shelves of old cleaning supplies. Most of the bottles had dried out. The ladder was sound. The hand truck needed air in both tires. A set of folded canvas tarps occupied the bottom shelf. Julia carried one outside, climbed the ladder, and tied the loose gutter against the awning support. It wasn't a repair, but it would keep the metal from tearing free if the wind rose. By the time she locked the depot, the sun had dropped behind the pecan trees. Her gloves were black at the palms. She sat in the car and made a list on the back of the sanitation notice. Electric service, plumber, broken glass, roof inspection, refrigeration. She stopped there. The list already looked expensive. Under it, she wrote, "Find out what root controller did." She knew what such equipment usually did. It logged arrivals, opened loading stages, and kept sequence records. What she didn't understand was why Benjamin had left this one attached after the public counter closed. At home, Julia showered, heated a bowl of canned soup, and checked her bank account. Her warehouse pay had been smaller than usual. She moved money from savings into checking, then moved half of it back. She had spent years treating savings as proof that she wasn't in trouble. Now the number looked less like safety, and more like the distance she could afford to travel before she had to turn around. Caitlin called while Julia was washing the bowl. "I hope Eric didn't pressure you about tomorrow," she said. Julia dried her hands. "He told me to be there. He told me the same thing. You're going." "Well, yes. Somebody has to keep him from throwing away every piece of furniture that isn't nailed down." Julia leaned against the kitchen counter. "You want to sell the house. That doesn't mean I want him deciding everything. You signed the farm with him." Caitlin was quiet for a moment. That wasn't about him. It looked like it was about him. It was about not getting trapped. If the estate stays open, every repair becomes a meeting. Every tax payment becomes a meeting. I can't keep driving over here every time a fence post leans. Caitlin lived less than an hour away, but she spoke of Albertville as if it required a passport. "You could have let me have part of the farm," Julia said. "And then what? The 3 of us argue instead of 2? You didn't ask what I wanted until the papers were ready. We thought the depot made sense for you. Why? Because Grandpa took you there." Julia waited. Caitlin sighed. "And because you're good with old things." It was meant kindly. That made it worse. "I work in shipping," Julia said. "I don't restore buildings. I know that." "Do you?" "Julia," I called, "because I didn't want you thinking we were against you." Julia looked at the water running over her fingers. She had left the faucet on. "What would it look like if you were against me?" Caitlin didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was softer. "We'll see you tomorrow." After the call, Julia shut off the water. She didn't sleep well. At 7 the next morning, she loaded flattened produce boxes into her car and drove to the farm. Eric's truck was beside the equipment shed. A white pickup with a company name on the door stood near the milking barn. The prospective lease operator and Eric were already walking the fence line. Caitlin opened the farmhouse door before Julia reached the porch. "You brought boxes." "Good. Inside, the kitchen smelled like coffee and the lemon cleaner Benjamin kept under the sink. Caitlin had arranged colored labels on the table. Keep, sell, donate. Julia set down the boxes. "Where's Eric, with the lease man?" "He asked us here for a meeting. He said he'd be 20 minutes. It was 45. During that time, Caitlin emptied cupboards while Julia wrapped dishes in newspaper. They worked without talking much. Every few minutes, one of them held up an object and waited for the other to decide what it meant. Caitlin wanted the glass bowl because their grandmother had used it. Julia wanted Benjamin's heavy coffee mug with the cracked handle. They both left the chipped plates for donation. In the mudroom, Julia took the work jacket from its hook. A peppermint wrapper crinkled in one pocket. The other held 2 carriage bolts and a receipt from the electric cooperative. Julia unfolded it. The receipt showed a minimum service payment for the Martling Road Depot, made 5 months earlier. It wasn't a full power bill. It was a standby account charge. Caitlin, her sister, was tying a box closed. "What? Did you know Grandpa kept electrical service at the depot? I thought it was disconnected." "So did I." Caitlin looked at the receipt. Maybe that was the final charge. It says standby. Then ask Eric. He handled the bills when Grandpa got sick. Julia folded the receipt along its old crease. Eric said there wasn't active service. Standby isn't active. "No, but it isn't nothing." Caitlin pulled another piece of tape. "Please don't turn this into a fight before we know what it means." Julia slipped the receipt into her pocket. "I asked a question, and I'm telling you who has the answer." That was the pattern, plain enough to touch. Eric held the records. Caitlin translated Eric. Julia asked permission to know things that affected her. She had participated in it for years. Whenever a family decision became uncomfortable, she waited for one of them to explain the part they thought she needed. Then she complained about being left out after the decision was made. Eric entered through the back door with mud on his boots. "The lease looks good," he said. "He wants use of the south equipment shed." Julia held out the receipt. Why was Grandpa paying standby electric service at the depot? Eric read it and shrugged. He kept a few old accounts open. "Why?" "You know, Grandpa, he didn't trust shutoffs. He paid this 5 months ago. And you told me the building had no service. It doesn't. Standby keeps the account from being retired. You still have to request connection. Do you have the account records?" Eric opened the refrigerator and took out a bottle of water. "Somewhere. I need them." "For what?" "To restore service." He twisted off the cap. "You've owned the place for less than a day, and the deadline is already waiting. The transfer hasn't recorded yet. That gives me time to prepare." Eric studied her over the bottle. He was used to Julia, either giving in or getting angry. Calm persistence required him to choose a real answer. "The utility folder is in Grandpa's desk," he said. "Bottom drawer." Caitlin looked up. She hadn't known that either. Julia went to the small room Benjamin had used as an office. The bottom drawer was locked. She returned to the mudroom, checked the brass ring, and found a key no longer than her thumbnail. The drawer opened. Inside were labeled folders for the farmhouse, barns, depot, vehicles, and taxes. Julia took only the depot folder. It held old bills, the standby account number, and a handwritten note authorizing reconnection by the property's next lawful owner after transfer. Benjamin had signed and dated it. Eric stood in the doorway. He probably did that for every account. Then this one should be easy. I'm saying don't read too much into it. Julia closed the folder. I'm reading what it says. For once, she didn't ask whether she could take it. She carried the folder to the kitchen, placed Benjamin's jacket on top of it, and picked up her car keys. Caitlin glanced at the half-filled boxes. "Are you leaving?" "Yes." "We haven't finished." Julia looked at the labels spread across the table. "You two can decide what to keep." The words surprised all 3 of them. She drove back to Martling Road with the folder beside her. At the depot, she unlocked the office and set Benjamin's jacket over the chair again. Then she laid the utility papers beneath the dark route controller, where they would be ready when the deed recorded and the power could be restored. The papers stayed there through the weekend while Julia worked around them. She removed wet cardboard from the office, carried rusted shelving out to the concrete, and opened every window that would move. The broken pane let in flies and red dust from the road. She cut a square from one of the canvas tarps and fixed it over the opening until she could replace the glass. On Monday morning, the estate attorney called. "The agreement has been approved," he said. "Your deed was recorded about 20 minutes ago." Julia sat on the loading platform with a bottle of water between her shoes. So, the property is mine now? It is. And the 60 days starts today. Yes. He hesitated, giving her room to reconsider something that could no longer be reconsidered. I emailed the recorded deed, he said. You'll receive the original by mail. Thank you. Julia, the family agreement settled ownership. It didn't certify the condition of that building, I understand. Keep records of whatever you spend. She looked at the loose gutter tied against the awning. I've already started. After the call, she opened the utility folder on the office desk. The Electric Cooperative's customer service number was printed on the latest statement. The woman who answered asked for the service address, account number, and proof of ownership. Julia provided all three. Then came the question she had expected. Is the building occupied? Not yet. Commercial use? It was a milk depot. Is it one now? Julia looked through the glass partition toward the loading floor. I'm trying to find that out. The woman explained that standby status had preserved the meter and service connection. It had not guaranteed the building's internal wiring. Before power could be restored, Julia needed an inspection from a licensed electrician. How long does reconnection take after that? Usually 1 business day. Usually was a generous word. It meant 1 day if nobody found a problem. Julia called 3 electricians. One was booked for 2 weeks. Another didn't work on old refrigeration systems. The third said he could stop by late that afternoon if she was willing to wait. She was. The electrician arrived in a white service van just before 5. He was a broad man with reading glasses hanging from his shirt collar. He walked through the depot without commenting on the smell or the dust. That made Julia trust him slightly more. He opened the main electrical panel near the refrigeration room. Who shut this place down? He asked. My grandfather. He know electrical work? Enough to be careful. The man pointed to 3 breakers tagged with red wire. These are isolated. Cooling compressor, transfer pump, and bay heater. Everything else looks orderly. Can you tell why he isolated them? Not without energizing the panel and testing each circuit. Julia showed him the root controller. That should be on the low-load circuit, she said. The office lights too. He followed the conduit with his flashlight. You've looked at this. My grandfather taught me the layout. He taught you which breaker feeds what? Some of it. The electrician nodded once. It wasn't praise exactly, but it felt better than Eric's warnings. He tested the panel, checked the outlets, and inspected the service entrance. The office circuit held. So did the lights over the loading floor. The isolated equipment remained off. This building was shut down on purpose, he said, not abandoned in the middle of a failure. Can you approve reconnection? For lights and standard service, yes. I'm noting that the refrigeration equipment stays isolated until somebody qualified checks it. Julia signed his invoice. The amount took a noticeable bite from her checking account, though not yet from savings. Could the root controller come on when service is restored? She asked. If its own switch is on, it doesn't have one, then it may come on with the office circuit, and if it doesn't? He closed his tool case. Then you'll have one more old thing that needs fixing. He sent the inspection approval before driving away. The next afternoon, a utility truck turned onto the concrete apron. Julia stood by the office while the technician checked the meter, broke the old seal, and set a new one. Main disconnect off, he called. Yes. He finished at the meter, returned to his truck, and waited while Julia went inside. The main disconnect was stiff. She pulled it down, then pushed it firmly upward. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the office lights flickered. One fluorescent tube buzzed alive. Another blinked twice and went dark. A ceiling fan turned a few inches, stopped, and began moving again. The root controller remained black. Julia waited beside it. She checked the breaker. She tested the outlet beneath the desk. Power was reaching the office. The controller's cable disappeared through a metal plate fixed to the wall, with no plug she could remove. The utility technician came to the door. Everything holding? So far. Call if the main trips. He left before Julia could ask anything about the controller. It wasn't his equipment, and he had done the one job he came to do. She turned on each approved light. 2 worked in the office, 4 on the loading floor, and 1 in the apartment kitchen. The bathroom fixture gave a bright pop and went out. Still, the depot looked different under electric light. Not better exactly. The stains were clearer. Dust showed in every corner. But the rooms no longer disappeared when she stepped away from a window. Julia found an extension cord in the storage closet, tested it, and plugged in a box fan. The fan began pushing old air out through the broken office pane. That deliberate act worked. Benjamin's standby account had saved the service connection. His panel labels had kept unsafe equipment isolated, and the building had power before the first week of her deadline ended. The controller stayed dark. Julia worked until nearly 10. She cleaned the apartment kitchen, brought in a folding cot from her car, and set a lamp beside it. Staying overnight saved her a drive home and let her watch for electrical trouble. She ate a sandwich at the small kitchen table. The refrigerator didn't work, so she kept her bottled water in a cooler. Through the doorway, she could see the loading floor lights. The building made different sounds with power restored. The office fan hummed. A relay clicked somewhere in the wall. The ceiling fan ticked each time one bent blade passed the pull chain. Julia checked the panel before sleeping. Nothing felt hot. No breaker had tripped. She woke once after midnight because a truck passed on Martling Road. Its headlights moved across the apartment ceiling, then vanished. The next sound woke her completely. It was a hard mechanical knock, followed by a low electric hum. Julia sat up on the cot. A second relay closed in the loading room. She reached for her phone. The screen showed 4:10 in the morning. The hum deepened. Metal pipe trembled against the wall. Julia pulled on her shoes and went into the depot. The loading floor lights were off, but a pale green glow came from beside the office. The root controller was awake. Lines of text moved across its display. The first showed the date, wrong by several months. The second showed a system check. Then the screen cleared. Route 7. Awaiting collection. Julia stood close enough to see her reflection in the glass. Behind the wall, one of the refrigeration units had started. The breaker tagged with red wire was still off, yet the cooling system was running on a separate control circuit she hadn't known existed. Cold air moved through a vent above the transfer lines. She went straight to the main panel. The isolated breakers hadn't changed. A smaller panel beside the controller now showed one green light. Julia didn't touch it. The electrician had approved lights in ordinary service, not refrigeration. She returned to the main disconnect and pulled it down. The depot went silent. The root controller's words disappeared. For several seconds, Julia stood in the dark with her phone light aimed at the panel. She had wanted the controller to work. She hadn't wanted the building to start running equipment by itself before dawn. She switched the main service on again, then opened the smaller panel. The green light returned after a few seconds. Below it was a narrow breaker labeled Schedule Control. She switched that breaker off. The controller went dark. The office lights stayed on. Julia photographed the panel, the display, and every label she could find. Then she wrote down the time and the exact message. At sunrise, she searched the office for a manual. The filing cabinet held delivery slips, tax forms, equipment brochures, and stacks of blank cleaning logs. Most dated from years before the public counter closed. None explained why the controller had awakened. She found the Sand Mountain Dairy Cooperative name on the bottom of an old route sheet. A telephone number was printed beside it. The first time she called, a recorded message said, "The office opened at 7. At 7 exactly, she called again. A receptionist answered. Julia explained that she owned the former Reed Milk Depot and needed information about a root controller. "One moment," the woman said. Julia expected to be transferred to maintenance. Instead, a second woman answered. "This is Morgan Davis." Her voice was low and alert, as though she had already been awake for hours. Julia repeated what she'd seen. "What time did the controller cycle?" Morgan asked. 4:10. "Exactly?" "Exactly." "And what did the display say?" "Route 7, awaiting collection." Morgan didn't respond for several seconds. Julia checked the phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Is that bad?" she asked. "It means somebody maintained the clock sequence." "My grandfather?" "Probably." "You knew him?" "I drove for him before I worked in this office." Julia sat down at Benjamin's desk. "Then can you tell me what Route 7 is?" "I can tell you what it was. It collected from farms east and south of Albertville. The depot cooled and transferred the milk before the main haul. Why would the controller still be waiting for a collection? That's what I'd like to know. Does the route still exist?" Morgan chose her answer carefully. She had members waiting for practical solutions, but she wasn't going to build one on a dead agreement. "A route identity exists in that controller," she said. "That doesn't mean you own an enforceable route." "What would mean that?" "A current cooperative record, a valid succession entry, proof that the equipment and schedule were maintained properly." Julia looked at the filing cabinet. Where would those records be? The cooperative keeps its master ledger. Your grandfather should have kept maintenance records at the depot. I haven't found them. Then don't assume the screen promises money. It doesn't. I didn't say it did. No, but people hear an old machine wake up and start deciding what they want it to mean. Julia let that settle. Morgan wasn't mocking her. She was warning her from experience. Why did you take the call yourself? Julia asked. Because the receptionist said, read Milk Depot. Another pause followed. Benjamin ran monthly test cycles, Morgan said. At least, he used to. I saw the signal appear in our dormant equipment log. I thought it ended when he got sick. When did you last see it? I'm not answering from memory, not on something that could become a claim. What can you answer? I can tell you not to run that cooling system again until it's inspected. I can also tell you the controller's serial number will let us compare your unit with our archived equipment list. Julia read the number from the metal plate. Morgan repeated it back. That matches the depot series, she said. It's useful, but it's not enough. Useful but not enough had become the building's condition. Can you check the master ledger? Julia asked. I can confirm whether an entry exists. I can't authenticate your right to it by telephone. How long will that take? Not long. The larger problem is your deadline. The sanitation deadline, the route certification window. If that controller belongs to the dormant route, I think it does, succession has to be tested within 60 days of ownership transfer. Julia looked at the recorded deed beside her. That was Monday. Then you've already started counting. What happens if I miss it? The route closes. Not sleeps, not pauses. Closes. Outside, morning light reached the loading platform. The blue line Julia had cleared ran straight toward the silent cooling room. What do you need from me? She asked. Send the deed, photographs of the controller, and the serial plate. Keep schedule control off. I'll come look at the depot after I check our records. Morgan gave her an email address. Julia sent everything before ending the call. Then she took a clean sheet from the desk, wrote the transfer date at the top, and numbered the days beneath it. By the time she reached the 60th line, morning had filled the office. Julia taped the sheet beside the controller. Then she called a refrigeration company and described what had happened. The service manager stopped her halfway through. You energized an old system after a long shutdown. The schedule circuit energized it. Did you shut it back down? Yes. Leave it down. We need to check for pressure, leaks, and contaminated oil before that compressor runs again. When can someone come? Thursday. Thursday was 3 days away. Julia wrote it beside the 5th line on her countdown. Morgan arrived before lunch in a dark blue pickup, with the cooperative's name printed on the door. She wore work boots and carried a small canvas bag instead of a briefcase. Julia met her on the loading apron. You got here fast, Julia said. I moved something. That was all Morgan offered. She walked around the outside first, looking at the bays, the cooling platform, and the drainage channel. She pressed one boot against a loose section of concrete. Benjamin patched this twice, she said. It didn't hold. It held long enough to become somebody else's problem. Julia couldn't tell whether Morgan disapproved of him for that. Inside, Morgan stopped on the blue line. You cleared it. My grandfather didn't allow anything to sit on it. No, he didn't. She went to the controller and read the serial plate without touching the switches. Julia showed her the photographs from 410. Morgan enlarged the image of the display on Julia's phone. That's the collection prompt, she said. So the controller still recognizes the route. It recognizes a schedule and an identity. You keep making those sound different. They are different. A disconnected road sign can still have a town's name on it. That doesn't mean the road is open. Julia folded her arms. Then tell me how to find out whether it's open. Morgan glanced toward the refrigeration room. You'll need more than this box. She opened her canvas bag and removed a handheld reader with 2 cables. One connected beneath the controller, the other ran to her tablet. The display remained dark because Julia had left schedule control off. Morgan powered only the controller through her reader. Green letters appeared. Route 7. Stand by. Morgan moved through several menus. Julia watched dates and codes appear. Most meant nothing to her. One column repeated at roughly monthly intervals. What are those? Julia asked. Test acknowledgments? From the cooperative? From this controller. It sent a signal. Our system acknowledged receipt. How recently? Morgan scrolled. The last full test was 6 weeks before Benjamin died. Julia leaned closer. You said you thought the cycles ended when he got sick. I thought wrong. Does this prove he maintained it? It proves somebody operated the test sequence here. Who else had access? Morgan looked toward the office. That's one of the things records might answer. Julia thought of Eric saying he'd entered the building the previous year. He'd known the main water valve was behind the refrigeration room. That didn't mean he'd touched the controller. It only meant Benjamin hadn't been the last person with a key. Can the cooperative compare those acknowledgments? She asked. If we have the receiving entries. You said you keep a dormant equipment log. We do. That's not the agreement itself. Morgan disconnected the reader. Where's Benjamin's maintenance book? I haven't found it. He used a narrow ledger, black cover, red cloth spine. I've searched the filing cabinet. He didn't keep it in the filing cabinet when I drove here. Where did he keep it? Morgan turned toward the loading room. Ask Lori Freeman. Who's Lori? She dispatched this depot longer than I drove for it. If anybody knew where Benjamin put records he didn't want carried off, it was Lori. Morgan called her from the office. The conversation lasted less than a minute. I'm at Reed, Morgan said. The controller cycled. A woman's voice answered sharply through the phone, though Julia couldn't make out the words. No, I'm not saying the route is live. I'm saying the test record is here. Morgan listened. Then come tell her yourself. She ended the call. She doesn't like you? Julia asked. She likes me fine. She doesn't like Hope getting ahead of facts. That seems common around here. It kept milk from spoiling. Lori arrived 40 minutes later in a small silver car with gardening soil across the back seat. She was 68, short, straight-backed, and dressed for an afternoon she'd intended to spend somewhere else. Bits of dry grass clung to her shoes. She looked at Julia for several seconds. You have Benjamin's eyes when you're suspicious, she said. I'm not suspicious. You will be. Lori walked past her and set her purse on the office desk. Morgan showed her the test entries. Lori put on glasses and read the dates one at a time. He didn't miss November, she said. The controller says he didn't, Morgan replied. I was here in November. He ran it. Julia pulled over a chair. Why? Lori looked at her. Because he said closed wasn't the same as finished. What does that mean? It means he wouldn't let the route die just because the public counter closed. Did he think it still belonged to him? Lori removed her glasses. Benjamin didn't talk that way. He said the depot had duties. People owned the duty if they were willing to do it. Morgan shook her head. That's exactly the kind of sentence that causes trouble. I told him so. What did he say? He told me to write the test time correctly. Julia almost smiled. Lori didn't. The maintenance book, Morgan said. Where is it? Where it always was. The cabinet is empty. Not that cabinet. Lori went to the root controller and crouched beneath it. A painted steel plate covered the lower part of the wall. Its screws looked newer than the surrounding metal. Julia had noticed the plate but assumed it covered wiring. Lori held out one hand, flat screwdriver. Julia brought one from the utility shelf. The top screw turned. The bottom one didn't. Julia knelt beside Lori and pressed harder, while Lori held the screwdriver straight. You'll strip it, Lori said. I won't. The screw gave with a dry snap. Together, they lifted the plate. Behind it was a shallow cavity between two wall studs. A plastic document sleeve rested on a narrow ledge beside the controller cables. Lori reached in and removed it. The black cover had faded at the corners. A red cloth strip ran along the spine. Julia recognized the handwriting before Lori opened it. Each page held dates, temperatures, switch positions, and short notes. Benjamin had recorded monthly controller tests throughout the previous year. The entries continued into the current year. Beside the last one, written 5 weeks before his death, he had marked signal received and underlined it once. No message to Julia appeared. No explanation waited inside the back cover. There was only work. Those are his initials, Lori said. I watched him make that last entry. You were here? Julia asked. He called because the cooling relay stuck during the test. I held a flashlight while he cleaned the contact. Did he tell you why he was still doing this? He said the next owner might need a clean record. Julia turned another page. Did he say who that would be? No. Lori answered without softening it. She wasn't going to reshape Benjamin's words to comfort his granddaughter. Morgan pointed to a notation written in the margin of every third test. Master ledger reference, she said. The same letters and page number appeared again and again. What does it refer to? Julia asked. Our root agreement ledger, the official cooperative copy. Can you check it now? I'll check it when I get back. Why not call? Because I want the page in front of me. Morgan photographed the maintenance entries, the cavity, and the controller serial. She included a ruler beside the serial plate and took the picture again. Lori looked around the loading floor while Morgan worked. "Your drains are blocked," she said. "I know. Your wash line has a split coupling. I didn't know that. And somebody left the bay seals compressed. They'll have to be replaced before an inspection." Julia looked at the rubber seals around the loading doors. "How can you see that from here? I spent 32 years watching drivers hit them wrong." Morgan returned the ledger to Julia. "Keep this dry and keep it here. It connects the test record to the property equipment. Does it prove the route is mine?" "No. It proves Benjamin maintained the controller." That answer was smaller than Julia wanted, but it was solid. The signal at 410 hadn't been a random electrical twitch. Benjamin had kept the route sequence alive on purpose. Morgan packed her reader. "If the master ledger reference matches, we can discuss succession." "Discuss?" "You'll still need refrigeration repairs, sanitation approval, verified temperature records, and a certified collection run, all within 60 days. "Yes." Lori picked up her purse. "You'll need help with the drains." Julia looked at her. "Are you offering?" "I'm saying you shouldn't pay a plumber to clear Milkstone if I can show you where it collects." "Why would you do that?" Lori glanced at the maintenance book. "Because Benjamin asked me once whether I thought you remembered the blue line." Julia didn't know what to say. Lori rescued her from needing to. "I'm free Wednesday morning. You'll need a long hose and rubber boots." Morgan called late that afternoon. Julia was replacing the office window with a sheet of clear temporary plastic when the phone rang. "I found the ledger entry," Morgan said. Julia stepped down from the ladder. "And?" "Route 7 is listed as dormant. The test reference matches Benjamin's log. Who succeeds to it? The language says the lawful owner of the Reed Milk Depot parcel may apply for succession." Julia looked at the deed on the desk. "I'm the lawful owner. You're eligible to apply. That isn't the same as approval. What's missing? A functioning depot and an authenticated run. Until those exist, there's no payment and no enforceable route. Can the entry disappear before the deadline? It closes automatically if certification isn't completed." Julia pressed the phone closer. "How much work are we talking about?" "I can't price your repairs. I can tell you the cooperative standards. Cooling, sanitation, transfer safety, controller accuracy, and one full collection sequence." The sound of tires crossed the concrete outside. Eric's truck stopped beside Morgan's fading tracks. He got out, saw the temporary glass, and then noticed the cooperative photographs Julia had spread across the desk. "I have to go," Julia told Morgan. Eric entered without knocking. "What is Sand Mountain Dairy doing here?" he asked. Julia ended the call and set the phone down. "Checking equipment? At this depot?" "Yes. Why?" She closed Benjamin's maintenance book before answering. "Because the equipment still has a record." Eric's attention dropped to the black cover. For the first time since the estate meeting, he looked at the building as if leaving it to Julia might have cost him something. Eric moved closer to the desk. "What kind of record?" "A maintenance record." "For what?" "Route 7. He looked toward the controller. "That thing hasn't run a route in years. It ran a test 6 weeks before Grandpa died." "Who told you that?" "I read the log." Eric reached for the black book. Julia put her hand on it first. He stopped. "I'm not going to steal it. I didn't say you were. You're acting like I need permission to see Grandpa's records. This one was inside my building." His expression changed at the word "my." "What exactly did the cooperative say?" he asked. "That the controller and their dormant records match. I'm eligible to apply for succession if I can restore the depot and pass a certified collection run. Eligible isn't ownership." Morgan said the same thing. "Then why are you hiding the book?" "I'm protecting it. From me? From leaving this office." Eric rested both hands on the desk. The farm and depot operated together. Sometimes. The route collected farm milk. It collected from several farms. You don't know that. Morgan drove it. That silenced him briefly. Eric had come expecting old equipment and one of Julia's short-lived projects. Morgan's involvement made it harder to dismiss. He didn't yet believe Julia had anything enforceable. He did believe the possibility could affect the farm lease, and that was enough. "The lease operator may want depot access," he said. "He can apply like anyone else once there's something to apply for. The farm shouldn't have to apply to its own depot. It isn't the farm's depot. It was part of the same operation. The deed says it's a separate parcel. Eric straightened. We can amend the division. No. You didn't even ask what I meant. You mean I return the depot, you add it to the farm lease, and you decide what happens here. You'd be compensated. With what? We'd work that out. Julia almost asked him to make an offer. That was the old reflex, letting Eric define the available choices and then trying to improve one. No, she said again. You don't know what repairs cost. Neither do you. I know commercial refrigeration isn't cheap. Then you should be glad you gave it away. His jaw tightened. Nobody gave anything away. You signed for it. So did you. Eric glanced at the temporary plastic over the broken pane. It pulled inward each time the box fan turned. If the root matters, the properties should stay together. They didn't matter together when you thought this place was worthless. I never said worthless. You called it a liability before I signed. It was one then. What changed? He didn't answer. Julia picked up the maintenance book and placed it in the filing cabinet. Then she locked the drawer. I have work to do. Eric stepped toward the office door, but stopped beside the blue line. Did Grandpa tell you about this route? No. Did Lori? No. Then don't act like you know what he intended. Julia held his gaze. You didn't ask what he intended when you took the farm. Eric left without saying goodbye. Through the window, Julia watched him sit in his truck with his phone in his hand. He stayed there long enough to make a call. Caitlin's name appeared on Julia's screen less than 10 minutes later. Julia let it ring. Wednesday morning, Lori arrived with rubber boots, a coiled hose, and a metal rod nearly as tall as she was. You own a drain rod? Julia asked. I kept the useful things when I retired. They started at the loading floor's shallow trench. Julia removed the steel grate while Lori connected the hose to the outside spigot. The water service was still off at the main. You're sure the wash line won't leak? Julia asked. It will. That wasn't my question. It's the answer you need. Lori directed Julia to open the main valve by 1/4 turn. Water moved through the pipe with a knocking sound. A thin stream appeared at the split coupling near the wall. Lori set a bucket beneath it. We can still test the drains, she said. Just don't open the valve farther. The first trench backed up almost immediately. Gray water rose around Julia's boots. Milkstone, Lori said. Minerals, fat, cleaner residue. Gets hard as mortar if it sits. They worked the rod through the drain in short turns. Julia pushed while Lori listened at the next cleanout. Stop, Lori called. Julia stopped. Pull back 2 inches. She did. Now turn. Something cracked below the floor. Water dropped with a low gulp and carried a white-gray clump into the catch basin outside. That's one, Lori said. Julia looked down the trench as the remaining water disappeared. How many? 4 drains, 2 cleanouts, 1 separator pit. They cleared all 4 before noon. The last drain fought them for nearly an hour. Julia's shoulders burned from turning the rod. Lori refused to let her force it. You break that line underground, you'll have a larger bill, she said. How do you know it isn't already broken? Because the rod comes back wet, not muddy. On the next attempt, Julia felt the obstruction shift. She turned slowly. The rod moved another foot. Water rushed through. Lori opened the wash valve farther. The split coupling sprayed the wall, but every trench drained cleanly. Julia laughed before she could stop herself. Lori shut the valve. Enjoy that until you price the coupling. It works. The drains work. Don't marry the whole building because one pipe behaved. They ate sandwiches on the loading platform. Lori had brought tomato slices wrapped in waxed paper. Julia shared a bag of chips. Did Grandpa talk about me here? Julia asked. Sometimes. What did he say? That you noticed sequence. Julia waited for more. Lori folded the waxed paper. He liked that you returned keys to the right hook. That's it? That's not a small thing in a depot. Julia looked at the brass keyring beside her. Eric thinks the route should stay with the farm. Eric thinks intact means safe. You know him well? I know how he walks into a loading bay, like the schedule should move around him. And Caitlin? She hated the smell here. That sounds like her. She also did the invoices one summer and caught 3 duplicate fuel charges. Julia hadn't known that. Lori brushed crumbs from her trousers. People aren't only the part that hurt you. I didn't say they were. No, You're still trying to decide whether you're allowed to say they hurt you at all. Julia crushed the empty chip bag into a small ball. Did Grandpa mean for me to find the log? I don't know. You saw him make the last entry. I saw him maintain the record. He didn't tell me his estate plan. He asked whether I remembered the blue line. He did. Why? Lori looked across the loading floor. Because I asked what would happen to this place when he was gone. That was his answer. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't proof that Benjamin had chosen Julia for Route 7. Still, it was the first sign that he had connected her to the depot before his death. The refrigeration technician arrived Thursday morning. Morgan came 20 minutes later with the cooperative standards printed in a binder. The technician removed access panels while Julia held a light. He checked oil, valves, pressure, wiring, and the separate schedule circuit. This relay should never have pulled in with the safety breaker isolated, he said. Can it be fixed? The relay can. That's not the expensive part. He showed her a cracked compressor seal and corrosion along a refrigerant line. The main cooling unit could be repaired. The smaller backup unit had failed beyond practical use. Do I need both? Julia asked. Morgan answered from the doorway. One working unit and a documented emergency plan. Could the emergency plan be another facility? If the cooperative approves the transfer procedure. The technician checked the temperature probes next. 2 read accurately. A third failed his test. Your grandfather's cycling probably saved the compressor bearings, he said. If this had sat untouched, I'd tell you to replace the whole system. That was the useful result. Benjamin's monthly tests hadn't only preserved a digital record. They had kept the main equipment from seizing. The technician wrote an estimate in his truck. When he handed it to Julia, the total was more than she'd earned during several months at the warehouse. This gets the cooling system ready for a sanitation inspection, he said. It doesn't cover the wash line, bay seals, electrical correction, or controller certification. Julia read the number twice. How long would the work take? If I order parts today, 6 business days. Morgan opened her binder on the office desk. Together, they made a second list. Repair cooling unit, replace damaged coupling, install new bay seals, calibrate temperature probes, clean and sanitize transfer surfaces, document holding temperature, complete controller audit, run 1 certified collection. What about the backup unit? Julia asked. Not required if the emergency transfer plan is approved, Morgan said. And after all this, the cooperative could still deny succession. Yes, even if the route is in your ledger. The ledger gives you the right to apply. The audit determines whether Route 7 can operate. Julia set the technician's estimate beside the checklist. Do cooperative members even need it? Morgan didn't answer quickly. Several farms east of here are hauling farther than they used to, she said. A working collection point would help them. Would they use this one? If it passed, and if the terms made sense. Would the cooperative pay? Not before authentication. You won't even estimate? I won't use money to push you into repairing a building you may not be able to afford. Morgan's restraint made Julia believe the need was real. It also left her alone with the risk. The technician packed his tools and left. Morgan followed after reminding Julia that the repair schedule had to leave time for testing before day 60. That afternoon, Julia called contractors for the wash, coupling, seals, sanitation work, and electrical correction. She wrote each estimate beneath the first. By evening, the likely total stood at $31,000. Julia had savings, but not enough to spend that amount without changing the shape of her life. She could cover it by emptying most of the account, selling her car for a cheaper one, and using the small credit line her bank had offered months earlier. Nothing guaranteed she would get any of it back. Her phone rang while she was adding the figures again. Caitlin didn't wait for a greeting. Eric says there may be a cooperative route attached to the depot. There may be. And you didn't think to tell me? I learned 2 days ago. We need to talk before you put money into that building. Julia looked at the estimate spread across Benjamin's desk. Why do we need to talk? Because if the depot has operating value, selling the farm and depot together changes everything. Julia closed her eyes. Caitlin continued before she could answer. Don't sign a repair contract. Eric and I are coming tomorrow. Julia didn't agree to wait. I'll listen, she said. That's all. Then wait until we get there. Caitlin ended the call. Julia sat behind Benjamin's desk with the phone in her hand. The repair estimate lay beside the maintenance log. On the other side of the desk sat the utility folder she had taken from the farmhouse without asking. She called the refrigeration company. "I want the parts ordered," she said. The service manager reminded her that the deposit would be non-refundable once the order went through. "I understand. You have a sanitation deadline?" "Yes. I'll send the contract." The email arrived before Eric and Caitlin had time to leave home. Julia read every page, signed it, and authorized the deposit from savings. The confirmation screen stayed open longer than necessary. She had never spent that much money in one motion. Her hands felt cold, though the office was warm. The next morning, Eric parked near the loading bay. Caitlin pulled in behind him. They arrived separately, which told Julia they hadn't agreed on what they wanted from her. Caitlin entered carrying coffee for all three. "I remembered yours," she said, handing Julia a cup. It had cream and 1 sugar. Exactly right. "Thank you." Eric declined his. He walked through the loading room, looked at the cleared drains, and pressed one hand against the new temporary window. "You've done a lot," Caitlin said. Lori helped. "Lori Freeman?" "Yes." Caitlin looked toward Eric. The name carried weight with both of them. Lori wasn't someone Julia had hired to confirm a hopeful story. She had known the depot when it worked. Eric returned to the office. "What did you sign?" "A refrigeration repair." "You told her you'd wait," he said. "I told her I'd listen." Caitlin placed the remaining coffee on the desk. "Then listen. There's interest in buying the farm. Not a signed offer yet, but serious interest." "I thought Eric wanted the lease." "He does," Eric said. "The lease is still the better option." Caitlin ignored him. "If the depot has a route attached, the buyer could pay more for both parcels together. The route isn't certified. We know that. Then you don't have anything to include in a sale. We could make the sale conditional on certification." Julia looked at Eric. "And how does that help your lease?" "It doesn't," he said, "which is why selling isn't the answer." Caitlin tightened her mouth. "We're discussing options." "No," Julia said. "You're discussing 2 different ways to control this property." Caitlin pulled out the chair opposite the desk. "Nobody is trying to control you. You told me not to sign a contract because you're about to spend $31,000 on a building that may never earn anything." Julia watched her reaction. "Eric told you the total?" "He said it would be around that." "I told him commercial refrigeration is expensive," Eric said. "I didn't know the number." Caitlin looked from one to the other. "That doesn't matter." "It matters to me," Julia said. She hadn't told either of them the estimates. Eric had guessed close enough to make Caitlin believe he knew more than he did. The old pattern was still working, even when nobody had the facts. Caitlin tried again. "Sell the properties together. We divide the added value fairly." "What's fairly?" "We'd have appraisals. The depot deed is mine, and the farm deed is ours. That's why combining them could help everybody." Eric shook his head. "You're talking like there's already a route. Morgan hasn't approved anything." Caitlin turned on him. "You're the one who called me. I called because Julia was dealing with the cooperative without telling us. Why should she tell you?" The question surprised Julia more than it surprised Eric. He looked at Caitlin. "Because any collection agreement could affect the farm. That doesn't make it yours. It makes it relevant." Caitlin stood and walked to the office window. For a moment she studied the pecan trees instead of either sibling. "I don't want another shared property problem," she said. "I want a clean sale. I want the estate finished. I don't want 3 years of Eric saying we should wait and you saying you need more time to fix something." Julia set down her coffee. "Then sell your share of the farm to Eric. He can't afford it." Eric's face hardened. "That's not the discussion." "It's exactly the discussion," Caitlin said. "You want control without paying me out, and you want cash before the ink dries." Julia listened as their real argument took over. Neither had come because they thought she was making a dangerous investment. Eric feared losing a useful root from his farm lease. Caitlin feared the depot would make the whole estate feel unfinished again. Their concern for Julia was present, but it lived beneath their own needs, where it had always lived. She had spent years trying to earn a better place in those needs. If she stayed agreeable, Eric trusted her with errands. If she stayed available, Caitlin included her in decisions after the difficult parts were settled. Julia had mistaken being useful to them for being secure with them. "I'm not selling the depot," she said. Caitlin turned from the window. "You don't have to decide today. I decided when I signed the repair contract." Eric leaned against the doorframe. "Then understand something. The farm won't cover your costs. I didn't ask it to. And if certification fails, we aren't buying the building back. I didn't ask that either. Caitlin's voice softened. What happens if you lose your savings? Julia wanted to say she wouldn't. The answer would have been a lie. I'll have less savings. That's not funny. I'm not joking. You've always been careful with money. Yes. And now you're risking it because Grandpa left you a broken building. Julia looked at the black maintenance book. No. I'm risking it because I accepted responsibility for the building. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't. Eric pushed away from the frame. If you won't sell, transfer the parcel back into the estate temporarily. Let the lease operator fund certification. If the route works, we structure a separate payment to you. Who controls it during that time? The estate. You and Caitlin. All three of us. 2 votes to 1. Eric didn't deny it. Julia stood. No transfer, no combined sale, no farm lease over this parcel. Caitlin looked down at the coffee she had brought. You're making this personal. It was personal when you decided the depot made sense for me, because I'm good with old things? I didn't mean that as an insult, I know. That's part of the problem. Caitlin picked up her bag. At the door, she stopped beside Julia. If this goes wrong, please don't make us the people who let you do it. Julia felt the old answer rise. She nearly promised not to blame them. She nearly made Caitlin comfortable so they could leave as a family still pretending nothing had changed. Instead, she said, You did let me do it. You signed the property over. Caitlin's face closed. She left without taking the untouched coffee. Eric stayed another moment. Grandpa kept the farm and depot connected for a reason. Then why did he write a will that allowed them to be divided? He expected us to use judgment. So did I. Eric went out after Caitlin. Julia watched their vehicles leave in opposite directions. The conversation cost more than the refrigeration deposit. She could feel the space it left. There would be no family dinner that week, no group message asking what she wanted from the farmhouse, no easy call if her car failed or she needed help moving equipment. Those things had never been reliable, but she had relied on the possibility of them. Morgan arrived that afternoon with an emergency transfer map. I passed Eric's truck on Martling Road, she said. Caitlin was here too. Do they want the route? They want the decision. Morgan set the map on the desk. It showed the farms once served by Route 7 and the nearest active collection points. Several old stops were crossed out. Others had been shifted to longer routes. This is current? Julia asked. As of last month, 3-member farms east of Albertville were hauling milk well beyond the old depot. One sent a driver south before dawn, then back north to the cooperative's main haul point. Another depended on a collection slot that changed twice a week. What does the extra distance cost? Julia asked. Fuel, driver time, and cooling margin. Mostly it costs predictability. Would reopening here fix it? If this depot can hold temperature and run on schedule, it shortens all 3 hauls. Julia traced the roads with her finger. Route 7 wasn't a label preserved for sentimental reasons. It filled a gap still visible on Morgan's map. Why hasn't the cooperative opened another point? She asked. We don't own a suitable building in the service area. We can reroute trucks. We can't create clean refrigerated transfer space out of a parking lot. And you still can't promise payment. No. Can you promise members would be allowed to use it? If Route 7 passes, access has to be offered under the cooperative's published terms. You couldn't reserve it for the Reed farm. I wouldn't. Morgan studied her. Your brother may expect that. He expects the farm to come first. Benjamin didn't run it that way. Julia looked up. The Reed farm used Route 7, Morgan said. It didn't own the schedule. If Benjamin delayed 3 other loads to favor his own, he would have lost the agreement. That changed the shape of Eric's argument. The depot had worked beside the farm, but its value came from serving beyond it. Julia had begun repairs to prove she hadn't accepted something worthless. That goal now felt too small. Even a successful certification would mean little if she treated the route like a prize to hold over her siblings. What would dependable operation require? She asked. Someone here before collection, daily temperature records, clean transfer equipment, a backup procedure, no exceptions for family. Julia pulled a clean sheet from the desk. Morgan watched her write. I thought you wanted to know whether the route paid, she said. I do. Then why are you asking about daily work? Because if I spend $31,000 only to prove Eric wrong, I'll have spent it for the wrong reason. Morgan sat across from her. What's the right reason? Julia looked through the office window at the cleared blue line. to make this place useful again. She called the bank before closing time. She accepted the credit line, arranged the transfer from savings, and scheduled the remaining repair payments. Then she listed her car for sale and asked the warehouse manager for every early shift she could work without missing the depot contractors. By sunset, the money was committed. The route still wasn't hers. The payment still wasn't real, but Julia's decision had moved beyond either question. She was going to build a working collection point and give Route 7 a fair chance to survive. The first parts arrived the next morning. Julia signed for boxes of seals, gauges, tubing, and one new temperature probe. The refrigeration crew spread protective cloth across the loading floor and removed the damaged line. Their tools made sharp, clean sounds inside the quiet building. Julia taped Morgan's standards beside her 60-day sheet. Under them, she added a work schedule: cooling repair, wash system, bay seals, sanitation, dry cycle, independent audit, certified collection. She left no space for family meetings. Her warehouse manager gave her early shifts 3 days a week. Julia began work before sunrise, finished before noon, and drove straight to Martling Road. On the other days, she slept in the caretaker apartment, so contractors could arrive early. The apartment changed by inches. She scrubbed the kitchen cabinets and removed the swollen shelf beneath the sink. She replaced the bathroom light. Lori brought 2 curtains she'd kept in a linen closet and said they were only temporary. They fit the bedroom windows exactly. "You measured these," Julia said. "Years ago." "For what?" Benjamin asked, whether the apartment could be made decent again. "When?" "Last fall." Julia held one curtain against the window. "Did he say who would live here?" "No." Lori handed her the other panel. "You keep asking for sentences he didn't leave." "I know." "Then stop making me disappoint you." They hung the curtains without discussing it again. On the loading floor, the work moved faster. The refrigeration crew replaced the cracked seal, cleaned the compressor contacts, and fitted the new line. An electrician rewired the schedule relay so it couldn't bypass the safety circuit. The damaged wash coupling came out in 2 corroded pieces. Julia kept every removed part in a labeled box until Morgan could photograph it. She recorded dates, invoices, and serial numbers in a new binder. Benjamin's black maintenance log stayed in the locked filing cabinet unless she needed to compare an entry. Lori watched the record keeping with approval she tried not to show. "You put the date on the outside of the folder," she said. "That's where it belongs. Some people put it inside, then you have to open it." "Exactly." It was the closest Lori came to saying well done. The new bay seals arrived rolled inside long cartons. Julia and Lori pulled out the old rubber, cleaned the channels, and worked the replacement strips into place. The material resisted every turn. Halfway around the first bay, Julia's hands cramped. "Take 10 minutes, Lori said. "I'm fine. You're bending the seal." Julia looked down. Lori was right. The rubber had twisted where Julia had forced it through the corner. She backed it out 6 inches and sat on the loading edge. Lori handed her water. "Speed comes after correct." "Grandpa said that." "He got it from me." Julia laughed. "I'm serious," Lori said. "He used to hurry every closing job because your grandmother waited supper on him. I told him the fast work only gets you home early if you don't come back tomorrow to repair it." Julia drank the water. "Did you two always argue?" "Only when he was wrong." They finished both bays before dark. The next day, Morgan brought current cleaning procedures and a stack of blank temperature sheets. She made Julia walk through the sanitation sequence without turning on the equipment. "Well, where do you start?" Morgan asked. "Receiving connection?" "Wrong." Julia looked at the diagram. The water source. Before that. The main valve. Before that. Julia glanced toward the office. Morgan waited. "Verify the previous cycle closed," Julia said. "Good. If the system thinks it's in transfer mode, you don't introduce wash water." They worked through the sequence 4 times. Morgan changed one condition each time. A failed probe, a late truck, a blocked drain, a power interruption during cooling. Julia answered most correctly. When she didn't, Morgan made her start from the beginning. "You're not testing whether I can memorize this," Julia said. "I'm testing whether you know what changes when something goes wrong. Will the auditor do the same thing? The auditor will test the equipment. I'm testing the person who intends to operate it." By late afternoon, Julia could close the schedule circuit, isolate the transfer pump, and begin a wash cycle without referring to the diagram. Morgan leaned against the office door. Who's your backup operator? I don't have one. You need a name backup for the emergency plan. Can it be Lori? It can be anyone qualified and willing. Lori was scraping old adhesive from the far bay. I heard that. You know the system, Julia said. I knew the old system. You've been here for every repair. That doesn't make me available at 4 in the morning. Julia went to the loading floor. What would make you available? Lori kept scraping. A schedule. A key. No assumption that retired means waiting by the phone. That's fair. And if I say no on a day I'm not scheduled, you don't make that face. What face? The one you're making. Julia relaxed her mouth. Would you agree to 2 scheduled mornings a month until I train someone else? 3. You'll need sleep more than you think. Morgan wrote Lori's name into the draft emergency plan. That small agreement mattered. Julia was no longer asking for rescue whenever work became too much. She had offered a defined role, and Lori had accepted defined terms. On Friday, they ran water through the wash system. The repaired coupling held. Each spray head opened in sequence. Water moved through the transfer lines, crossed the clean surfaces, and drained into the trench without backing up. Lori stood beside the separator pit and watched the flow. Clear, she called. Julia advanced the controller to the next step. The pump changed pitch. A red indicator turned green. Morgan checked the cycle time against her watch. Within standard. Julia let out a breath. The system completed the wash and shut itself down. No water stood on the floor. No fitting leaked. No breaker tripped. Morgan signed the bottom of the cleaning sheet as a witness, then drew a line through the space labeled Approved. This is not approval, she said. I know. It's one completed wash cycle. I know that too. Morgan gave her the page. Julia placed it in the binder anyway. The sanitation inspection took place the following Monday. A county inspector checked the water source, drains, transfer surfaces, pest barriers, and cleaning records. Julia answered questions while Lori remained in the office. The inspector found residue behind one pipe bracket. Julia cleaned it while he finished the rest of his walk. He returned, checked the bracket again, and signed the sanitation form. Conditional operating clearance, he said. Valid for testing and 1 certified collection. Full operating status depends on that result. It was the first outside approval the building had received since Julia took ownership. She wanted to call Caitlin. The impulse came so quickly that Julia already had the phone in her hand. For years, every small success had needed a family witness before it felt complete. A better warehouse schedule, a repaired car, a rent increase she managed without asking anyone for help. She told Caitlin, waited for her response, and measured the event by how much interest came back. Julia looked at the signed form. Then she photographed it for the repair binder and sent the required copy only to Morgan. The success didn't need family approval to be real. Morgan replied within 5 minutes. Scheduled a dry cooling cycle for 4:10 tomorrow. I'll be there. Julia slept in the apartment that night. At 3:45, she made coffee and opened the loading bays. The new seals lifted without catching. Cool pre-dawn air moved across the floor. Lori arrived at 4. You're early, Julia said. So are you. Morgan came 5 minutes later with 2 calibrated temperature readers and a roll of numbered seals. At 4:08, Julia stood before the controller. Schedule circuit ready, she said. Morgan checked the panel. Ready? Transfer pump isolated? Confirmed. Cooling safety active? Confirmed. Julia entered the test command. At 4:10, the controller clicked. Route 7 appeared on the screen. This time, the compressor started through the correct safety circuit. Air moved across the cooling coils. The first temperature probe reported high, then began falling. Morgan placed her own readers beside Julia's probes. Don't watch the controller, she said. Watch the room. Julia checked the line connections, listened to the compressor, and ran one hand near each seal without touching it. No cold air escaped around the bays. After 20 minutes, the new probe matched Morgan's reader. After 40, the loading room reached holding standard. The temperature stayed there. Morgan introduced a simulated failure by disconnecting the third probe. An alarm sounded. Julia followed the procedure, isolated the failed reading, confirmed the 2 independent temperatures, and documented the time. Reset it, Morgan said. Julia did. The system recovered without losing standard. At the end of the dry cycle, the controller produced a complete sequence record. Morgan compared it with the cooperative clock and signed as a witness. This time, she didn't cross out the approval line. "Dry test passed," she said. Lori leaned against the clean bay door with both hands around her coffee cup. She smiled before remembering she preferred not to. Julia walked once across the loading floor. The lights shone on clean pipe, clear drains, and the blue line running unbroken to the platform. The building had done something useful in front of people who understood the work. Morgan began gathering her readers. "What happens next?" Julia asked. "I submit the dry test and request an independent auditor. How soon?" "If the records are accepted, we can schedule the controller audit and certified collection within 2 weeks. That leaves enough time. It leaves no room for a failed run." Julia closed the loading bay. "Then we don't fail it." Morgan looked toward the office. "Before the run, I have to notify affected cooperative members that Route 7 may return to service. Why? Because they need a chance to request collection and review the published access terms. The Reed Farm is a member. Yes. So Eric gets the notice. Eric and Caitlin are listed as the current farm owners. Both will receive it." Julia thought about keeping the test quiet until certification. It would have been easier. Eric couldn't challenge a plan he didn't know existed. But a hidden route serving selected people would only repeat the control she had refused to give him. "Send the notice," she said. "Same terms to everyone." Morgan submitted the dry test from Julia's office. Before leaving, she showed Julia the bulletin scheduled for release. It gave no promise of payment. It made no statement that succession had been approved. It listed a proposed certification date, the depot address, and the rules every member would follow if Route 7 passed. Julia approved it. At noon, the bulletin went to the cooperative members. The Reed Farm now knew exactly when her plan would be tested. The first response came from Caitlin. She sent it through the cooperative address listed on the bulletin, not the family message thread. "The Reed Farm is interested in supplying milk for the certification run. Please contact both owners before scheduling." Morgan forwarded it to Julia. "This is useful," she said over the phone. "The farm is close, the volume works, and the old route sequence began there. Did Eric agree? Both owners have to confirm. He won't." Then Caitlin's response isn't enough. Julia called her sister. Caitlin answered on the second ring. "I assumed Morgan would contact us." She did. "She needs Eric's agreement too." "I can handle Eric. What do you want? Why does everything have to be a trade with you now?" "Because yesterday you wanted a combined sale." Caitlin exhaled. "The farm needs a reliable outlet. If the depot passes, using it could help the lease and the sale value. That's true for every farm on the route. We aren't every farm. Under the cooperative terms, you are." Caitlin went quiet. Julia could hear a cabinet close in the background. Her sister was probably at the farmhouse, still sorting Benjamin's life into labeled boxes while telling herself the work was practical. "I'm trying to support you," Caitlin said, "then confirm the load without conditions." "I didn't say there were conditions. You didn't have to." Caitlin lowered her voice. "We need an agreement that you won't sell or assign the route separately before we settle what happens with the farm. I can't sell something I don't own yet. Then agreeing should be easy." "No." "Why?" "Because you're using the test load to reach into the depot. We're protecting the farm." "From what?" "From losing something Grandpa built around it." Julia looked at Morgan's route map. He built it around several farms. The Reed name is on the building. The cooperative rules are on the route. Caitlin's patience broke first. "You would not have this chance if Eric and I hadn't let you take the depot." Julia felt the sentence land. Caitlin heard it too. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Julia said, "You didn't let me. I accepted what you didn't want. I didn't mean it that way." "You did when we signed." Caitlin's voice became careful again. "If you won't give us any protection, I can't promise the farm load. Then don't." Julia ended the call before she could bargain against herself. An hour later, Morgan called again. "Eric declined participation," she said. "Did he give a reason?" "He said the farm owners haven't resolved how the depot affects their operations. It doesn't affect their operations unless they choose to use it. That's what I told him." "Did he mention ownership?" "No. He said he wouldn't send milk through equipment operated by someone without commercial dairy experience." Julia sat very still. "What did you say?" "I said experience is one reason we require an independent audit. He called me unqualified. He raised a safety concern as a cooperative member. I documented it. You know I passed the dry test. I also know he's your brother, and I'm not entering that argument for you. Does his complaint stop certification? Not by itself. The phrase by itself made Julia straighten. What else happened? One of the other farms withdrew interest this morning. After the bulletin? After speaking with Eric. Julia rose from the desk. What did he tell them? That the depot transfer is causing a family dispute, and the route may not survive it. He doesn't know that. No, but the member doesn't want a load tied up while relatives argue over the result. Can milk get tied up? If the test fails sanitation or temperature, the load can't continue through normal collection. We have disposal procedures, but nobody volunteers for that risk casually. So I lost 2 possible test loads. You lost the easiest one and one backup. Julia walked to the loading platform. The refrigeration unit was running a scheduled holding test. Its new line remained dry. The temperature sheet showed steady readings. Who's left? She asked. A member southeast of here. Longer haul to your depot. Smaller load. Is it enough? Barely, if the auditor accepts the route sequence. Will they still do it? They want written assurance that the cooperative will take responsibility for the milk after it passes through the certified transfer point. That sounds reasonable. It is. It also means we need the independent auditor present for the entire sequence, not only at the depot. When is the next available date? Morgan paused. The date we proposed is gone. I couldn't hold it without a confirmed load. Julia looked at the countdown beside the controller. How much time do I have? 23 days. And the auditor? I'm checking. Check now. I am checking, Julia. The call ended. That afternoon, Eric arrived at the depot again. This time, he stayed outside. Julia met him on the loading apron. You called the other members, she said. I called people who may put milk through this building, to tell them I'm unqualified, to tell them the truth. The equipment passed its dry test. You passed one controlled exercise with Morgan standing beside you. That's what training is. Eric looked toward the open bay. The clean floor and repaired seals gave him less to criticize than before. You're moving too fast, he said. I have a deadline. Then stop. No, you'll lose $31,000. That's mine to lose. It won't stay yours. When this fails, you'll ask the family for help. You mean I'll ask you? Yes. Eric said it without hesitation. That was how he saw the family. Help came through him, which meant choices eventually did too. I'm not asking, Julia said. Not today, not afterward. You sold your car. She hadn't told him. The buyer had collected it that morning. Julia had arranged to use an older hatchback she could afford outright, but the transaction wouldn't be finished until the next day. How do you know that? She asked. Caitlin saw the listing. So, the two of you are tracking what I sell now? She's worried. You called cooperative members and told them not to trust me. I told them to be careful, because I wouldn't transfer the depot back, because you don't understand the risk. Julia stepped closer, then explained the risk without asking for control. Eric opened his mouth, then closed it. The only risk he could explain was the one Julia already understood. Failed certification, lost savings, a building still needing maintenance. His real concern was different. If Julia succeeded alone, he could no longer treat her choices as temporary until he approved them. He looked past her toward the route controller. Agree that the Reed farm gets first access, he said. Caitlin and I will confirm the test load. I'll tell the other member the family issue is settled. The terms are published. Family access can still come first. No. You'd rather risk the route? I'd rather lose it under fair terms than keep it by making the depot yours in practice. Eric shook his head. That's pride. No. Pride would be pretending I don't need the farm load. I do. I'm still not buying it with control. He walked back to his truck. Before getting in, he turned. Grandpa wouldn't have shut his own farm out. I'm not shutting it out. You are. Eric drove away. Lori arrived half an hour later and found Julia cleaning an already clean transfer fitting. You'll wear the threads down, she said. Julia stopped. Lori took the cloth from her. What happened? Eric called members. I heard. How? People called me to ask if the place was safe. What did you tell them? That I wouldn't stand inside it if it wasn't. Julia leaned against the pipe. Did that help? One believed me. One said family fights spread. That sounds about right. Lori set the cloth on a shelf. You could use the Reed farm load, not under their condition. What condition? First access. Family preference. Lori's expression settled into something firm. Benjamin would have refused that. Eric says he wouldn't. Eric wasn't dispatching. Would Grandpa have risked losing the route over it? Yes. The answer came so quickly that Julia stared at her. Lori continued. Once the Reed farm truck arrived 12 minutes late. Benjamin put it behind 2 other loads. What did Eric do? He was driving that morning. He shouted in this office until Benjamin handed him a cleaning brush. Julia pictured her 30-something brother as a young driver, angry because his grandfather wouldn't move the schedule around him. What happened? He cleaned the spill by Bay 2 and waited his turn. That was the first clear answer anyone had given Julia about how Benjamin understood family access. He hadn't excluded the farm. He had required it to stand in line. Morgan called just after 6. I have an auditor, she said, Todd Ortiz. He can do the controller review and live sequence on day 54. That leaves 6 days if something fails. Yes. Is that the only date? Yes. What about the Southeast member? They'll provide the load if we issue the written assurance. Do it. There are conditions for you, too. The cooperative takes custody only after Todd certifies temperature and transfer. Before that point, the depot bears responsibility for handling failure. What does that mean in plain English? If your cooling system, sanitation process, or controller fails, the member is protected. You cover the test costs and the loss procedure. Julia thought of the money remaining in her account. How much milk? Morgan told her the volume. It was enough to hurt badly if everything went wrong, though not enough to ruin her. You also need to operate the complete schedule without coaching, Morgan said. I'll be present for the cooperative. I can't prompt you. Lori, she can serve as backup, but Todd will note any intervention. Julia looked at Lori. Lori nodded once. I accept, Julia said. I'll send the certification agreement. When the email arrived, Julia read the failure terms twice. Then she signed. Her dry test approval had won her a real chance. Eric's calls had made that chance later, harder, and more expensive. The remaining load came from someone who owed her nothing. If she failed, the cost would belong to her alone. Julia printed the agreement and placed it in the repair binder. Then she wrote Todd's date on day 54 and circled it in black ink. The next morning, Julia noticed the controller's incorrect date in her first photograph. She enlarged the display. The time had been right at 4:10, but the month was wrong. So was the day. Every dry test record produced since then carried the same error. Julia went to the controller and opened the settings menu. A date field appeared behind an access code. Benjamin's maintenance book included several 4-digit numbers, any one of which might open it. Her finger hovered over the buttons. Then she stopped. Changing the controller before Todd examined it could look worse than leaving an obvious problem in place. Julia photographed the settings screen and called Morgan. Don't enter anything, Morgan said. I haven't. Good. Todd needs to see the clock is found. Can he reject the test records? He can reject anything he can't verify. That isn't an answer. It's the only one I have. The cooperative receiving log has actual dates for Benjamin's signals. Your new temperature sheets have actual dates and witness signatures. Todd decides whether those records are enough to establish continuity. And if they aren't, the certified run doesn't happen. Julia looked at the countdown. Can we replace the clock before the run? If he authorizes it. So we wait. We preserve the evidence, Morgan said. Waiting and preserving aren't the same thing. Julia printed the controller photographs and added them to the front of the binder. On a separate page, she wrote when she first noticed the wrong date and that she had made no change. Lori arrived after lunch with a box of clean towels. You look sick, she said. The controller calendar is wrong. The clock battery went bad. You knew? I knew Benjamin changed it once. When? Couple of years ago? Was the date wrong after that? I didn't check dates. Dispatch time was right. Julia showed her the photograph. Lori read it and frowned. Don't touch it. I didn't. Good. Everyone keeps saying that, like I usually alter evidence for fun. Everyone keeps saying it because you've put most of your savings into a deadline. They spent the afternoon preparing for the live sequence. Lori checked Jose gaskets while Julia cleaned the receiving connection. They counted seals, labeled sample containers, and placed backup thermometers beside the transfer station. The work settled Julia better than reassurance could. At 6, a vehicle stopped outside. Caitlin entered through the office door carrying a folder. "I spoke to Eric," she said. "That must have been difficult. He'll release the farm load." Julia set down the sanitation checklist. "Under what condition?" "No condition." "None?" "He wants the certification done correctly. Yesterday he wanted first access. He still thinks the farm should have priority, but I told him holding back the load makes us look unreasonable." There was honesty in that answer, though not generosity. "The other member already committed," Julia said. "You can change the schedule." "No." Caitlin placed the folder on the desk. "The Reed farm is closer. It's the original first stop. Morgan said that herself. The current load is approved. You haven't collected it. They accepted the risk after Eric called people away." Caitlin looked toward the controller. "You'd rather use a stranger's milk than ours? I'd rather keep the commitment I made. We're trying to help now, after the dry test passed." "That's unfair. It's chronological." Caitlin opened the folder. Inside was a written confirmation signed by both farm owners, offering a load for certification under the published terms. Eric had signed without adding first access. For a moment, Julia considered it. The Reed farm was closer. Its collection sequence was already in the archived route pattern. Using it would remove several miles, reduce the timing risk, and give Todd a cleaner comparison with Benjamin's records. It would also leave the Southeast member after that operator had accepted the chance of a failed transfer. "I won't replace the confirmed load," Julia said. Caitlin closed the folder. "Then, what was the point of asking us?" "I didn't ask you. The cooperative notice invited every member. Do you hear yourself?" "Yes." "You sound like Morgan. That isn't an insult." Caitlin sat in the office chair. "Eric said you might refuse just to punish him. I'm not refusing the farm forever. You may not have a forever if this test fails. Then changing loads now would be an even worse thing to do." Caitlin rubbed her forehead. "I don't understand what you want from us." The question had once been all Julia wanted them to ask. Now that it came, she didn't need to turn it into an appeal. "I want you to use the same door as everyone else. We're your family." "Yes." That should mean something. It does. It means I'm not going to use the depot to hurt you. It doesn't mean you move ahead of the person who said yes when you said no. Caitlin looked down at the folder. "If the route passes, will the farm be allowed to use it?" she asked, "under the published terms. No first access. No ownership share. No, and no combined sale. No." Each answer removed another version of the future Caitlin had been trying to preserve. She rose slowly. "Eric won't accept that. He doesn't have to accept my ownership. He has to respect it." Caitlin took the folder and left. Lori had heard the conversation from the loading room. She waited until Caitlin's car was gone. "You could bar the farm entirely," she said. "I know. Eric interfered with certification. I know that too. Some people would call it sensible. Would you?" "No." Julia picked up the checklist again. "Then why bring it up?" "Because you need to know the difference between a boundary and a weapon." Julia looked toward the road where Caitlin had disappeared. "The farm can use the route if it passes. Eric can't manage the depot. That's clear enough? It may end whatever relationship we have left." Lori folded one of the clean towels and set it on the shelf. "It'll end the relationship where he decides what you're allowed to risk. That was most of it. Then there may be room for a different one later." Julia didn't answer. Later belonged to people who survived the next few days. Todd Ortiz arrived at 2:30 in the morning on day 54. He drove a plain gray truck and carried 2 locked instrument cases. His shirt had the name of his independent testing company above one pocket. He greeted Morgan, nodded to Lori, and asked Julia to show him where the records had been stored. "Locked filing drawer," she said. "Who has the key?" "I do." "Anybody else?" "Not since I took ownership." "Who had access before?" "My grandfather. My brother entered the building at least once during the previous year." Lori knew where the log was stored. Todd looked at Lori. "Did you remove or alter it?" "No." "Did you witness any tests?" "Yes." "Including the last one." He wrote down her answer without asking for a story. Julia unlocked the drawer. Todd photographed the maintenance book, where it lay before touching it. He wore clean gloves and examined the pages under a portable light. He compared Benjamin's monthly entries with a certified copy of the cooperative's receiving log. Each controller signal had a corresponding acknowledgement. Then he reached the latest records and stopped. "Controller date is wrong," he said. Julia handed him the statement she had prepared. When did you discover that? Yesterday morning. You entered the settings menu. Yes. I didn't enter an access code or change anything. How do you expect me to know that? I don't. I photographed the screen and called Morgan. Morgan produced her call log. The time matched the photograph metadata. Todd examined the controller's internal event record. The settings menu had opened once. No setting change appeared after it. He turned to Julia. Why didn't you correct the date? Because you hadn't seen it. Good. It was one word, delivered without warmth, but Julia felt her shoulders loosen. Todd connected his audit reader. He verified the controller serial against the cooperative equipment list and Benjamin's log. Then he opened the clock housing. The battery had weakened enough to lose the calendar during power interruption. A separate timing module had preserved the daily route sequence. That explains 4:10, Julia said. It explains how the schedule survived, Todd replied. It doesn't certify a route. He replaced the battery with a sealed audit unit and set the date using his synchronized clock. He marked the housing with a numbered seal. From now until the live run, nobody opens this panel. No one will. Todd inspected the temperature probes next. He placed each in a controlled bath and compared the readings with his instruments. The new probe passed. The two older probes remained within standard. He checked the wash cycle record, sanitation clearance, electrical correction, and refrigeration repair. At each stage, he asked Julia to explain what had been done and who had witnessed it. Lori answered only when Todd addressed her. Morgan gave him the master ledger extract. He read the Route 7 entry twice. Dormant agreement, he said. Succession application by lawful owner of depot parcel. Certification required inside the stated window. Julia placed her probate deed beside it. Todd compared the legal description in the deed with the property description in the ledger. He verified the address, parcel markers, and controller series. Does that establish succession? Julia asked. It establishes that the applicant and equipment match the entry. What's still missing? Performance. He closed the ledger copy. A route agreement isn't a display screen or a deed by itself. It's a service. The live sequence has to perform. Still, one uncertainty had been removed. The wrong calendar hadn't broken the maintenance chain. The controller, Benjamin's log, the cooperative acknowledgments, and Julia's parcel all matched one existing Route 7 entry. Todd walked the loading floor and stopped beside the schedule board. Any members excluded from access? He asked. No. Any preferred access agreements? No. Any family priority? No. Morgan glanced at Julia but said nothing. Todd continued. The applicant understands that successful certification binds operation to the cooperative terms. You can't pass with open access and then close the route to protect a private arrangement. I understand. That answer carried its own cost. If Route 7 passed, Julia couldn't use it to force Eric to apologize, surrender the farm, or admit he'd been wrong. The agreement would require her to serve his farm under the same terms as everyone else, if he chose to apply. She signed the operating declaration. At 3:50, the member truck radioed that it had completed pickup and was approaching the first route checkpoint. Todd sealed his instrument case and carried it to the loading floor. Morgan opened the cooperative communication channel. Lori took her position beside the emergency panel. Julia turned on the office light, checked the blue line, and unlocked Bay 1. At 4:08, headlights appeared on Martling Road. At 4:10, the controller changed from standby to collection mode. Route 7, vehicle approaching. Julia checked the clock against Todd's sealed reader. The times matched. The truck turned onto the concrete apron and stopped before the blue line. Its engine stayed running while Todd inspected the vehicle seal and compared it with the number Morgan had received from the member farm. Seal matches, he said. Morgan spoke into her radio. Route 7 test vehicle at depot. Hold for receiving check. Julia opened the outside connection cover. She checked the gasket, wiped the contact surface with a sterile cloth, and waited. Todd took the incoming milk temperature through the truck's test port. He showed the reading to Morgan, then recorded it himself. Within collection standard, he said. Applicant may proceed. Julia stepped to the controller. The screen requested the vehicle code. She entered it. Then it requested the route checkpoint sequence. Her hand paused over the buttons. The southeast farm hadn't been part of Benjamin's old first stop pattern. Morgan had explained the revised code during preparation, but she couldn't prompt Julia now. Julia pictured the route map on the office desk. farm checkpoint, road transfer, depot receiving. She entered the revised sequence. The controller accepted it. Bay 1 unlocked with a solid metal sound. The driver backed slowly to the seal. Lori stood near the emergency panel, outside the marked vehicle path. Morgan watched the cooperative channel. Todd moved between the controller and his instruments without speaking. Julia secured the receiving connection and opened the first valve. The transfer pump came on. Milk moved through the line with a low, steady vibration. The cooling system increased output as the first volume entered. One probe dropped. The second held nearly level. The third began to rise. Julia watched it for 3 seconds. During training, Morgan had warned her that a warm pipe surface could cause a brief rise at the start of transfer. An actual cooling failure would appear across more than one reading. Julia checked the independent gauge. It held. She didn't stop the sequence. Todd looked at her, then wrote something on his form. The third probe reached its peak and began falling. Morgan released the breath she had been holding. The transfer continued. Julia recorded temperature at each required interval. She checked the pump sound, the receiving seal, and the flow indicator. She didn't watch anyone's face for approval. Halfway through the load, the controller asked for a route acknowledgement. Julia entered it within the allowed time. The message changed. Collection received. Cooling hold active. The truck's transfer compartment emptied. Julia closed the valve, isolated the connection, and waited for Todd to check the final temperature. He inserted his instrument. Everyone on the loading floor stayed still. Todd read the display and moved the probe to a second test point. The two readings matched. Transfer temperature within standard, he said. Morgan radioed the cooperative. Route 7 collection received. Certified hold in progress. The driver pulled away from Bay 1 and parked near the road. His job wasn't finished until the milk cleared the depot. Julia began the required line wash. Water entered after the milk circuit closed. The repaired coupling held. Each drain cleared as the wash moved through. Todd inspected the cleaning record and checked the controller seal. No unauthorized access, he said. The milk remained under cooling hold for the full test period. At the end, Morgan authorized the main haul truck to approach. That vehicle arrived as the sky began to lighten. Julia repeated the connection checks for outbound transfer. The controller opened the dispatch stage. Milk moved from the depot into the cooperative truck without a break in temperature. Morgan sealed the outgoing compartment. Route 7 load accepted into cooperative custody, she said over the radio. The words traveled through the depot speakers and returned in a burst of static. Todd completed his final readings. He stood at Benjamin's old desk while Julia, Morgan, and Lori waited. He reviewed the controller sequence, incoming and outgoing temperatures, sanitation cycle, equipment serial, and route checkpoint times. Then he signed the certification page. Live collection passed, he said. Julia gripped the back of the office chair. She had imagined relief as something lighter. What came instead was the weight of every obligation becoming real at once. "Does that certify succession?" she asked. "It certifies the route performance," Todd said. "The cooperative applies its ledger rule." Morgan took the signed page. "I'll submit the complete packet this morning. How long?" "The review is usually 3 business days, usually again." Todd packed his instruments. He removed nothing from the depot except his own test seals and duplicate samples. Before leaving, he handed Julia a copy of his report. "Keep your temperature records current," he said. "A past run isn't permission to get casual. I won't." He walked to his truck and drove away. The cooperative haul truck followed a few minutes later, carrying the certified milk north. Lori stood on the loading apron until both vehicles disappeared. Then she turned to Julia. "You didn't chase the third probe. I wanted to. That's why training matters." Morgan remained in the office uploading records. At 8:12, the cooperative system accepted Todd's report. At 11:30, the sanitation clearance changed from conditional to operating. The route succession entry still showed pending. Julia went to her warehouse shift the next morning. She checked her phone during break, at lunch, and in the parking lot afterward. Nothing changed. On the third business day, Morgan called at 4 in the afternoon. The certification packet was accepted, she said. Route 7 is active under the depot parcel owner. Julia sat in the older hatchback she had bought after selling her car. The air conditioner worked only when the vehicle moved. Active means what? It means you can operate scheduled collections under the cooperative agreement, and payment, Availability begins with the next cycle. I'm not promising a deposit date from this office." Julia smiled despite herself. Morgan had maintained the same answer all the way through. "What do I do now?" she asked. "Open tomorrow at 4. 2 members requested collection." Julia returned to the depot and prepared the loading floor. The next morning, she ran Route 7 without Todd, without a test label, and without anyone calling it a possibility. Morgan arrived with the first truck, but stayed outside the office. Lori came for her scheduled backup shift and made coffee in the apartment kitchen. The first member load cleared before sunrise. The second arrived 20 minutes later. By 7, both had transferred to the cooperative hall. Julia completed the wash cycle, closed the route, and entered the final temperatures. Then she went to the apartment and fell asleep on the folding cot with her boots still on. For the rest of that month, Route 7 operated on its published schedule. Some mornings carried 1 load, others carried 3. The Reed farm sent none. Julia paid the first repair bill and the credit line payment from her warehouse income. The depot account remained nearly empty except for operating deposits Julia transferred into it herself. She didn't ask Morgan when the availability money would arrive. On the first business morning of the next month, Julia checked the account before opening the office. A cooperative deposit had posted overnight, $3,600. The description read, "Route 7 Availability." Julia touched the screen to make sure she hadn't opened the wrong account. The rejected route still paid. It didn't erase the $31,000 she had spent. It didn't repair the apartment, replace the backup cooling unit, or free her from the early warehouse shifts. But it covered a dependable part of the depot's monthly operation, exactly as the ledger agreement required. She printed the deposit record and placed it in the binder behind Todd's certification. Morgan arrived at 5 with the collection manifest. Julia showed her the page. "You knew the amount?" Julia said. "I knew the agreement amount. You wouldn't tell me. I couldn't confirm it would be yours until you performed the route." Lori came in, carrying a jar of instant coffee. Julia placed the deposit record in front of her. Lori read it and nodded. "That'll keep the lights on," she said. Julia laughed. "That's all? What do you want? A parade?" "No?" "Good. We have a truck in 9 minutes." They opened Bay 1. Eric learned about the payment before noon. The cooperative sent monthly route statements to affected members. His statement listed Route 7 as active and identified the Reed Milk Depot as the collection holder. He called Morgan first. Then he called Julia. "That agreement belonged to the farm," he said. Julia stood beside the office copier with the phone against her ear. "The master ledger says otherwise. The farm established the route. Grandpa established it through the depot, with farm milk, with member milk. You're collecting income from a family operation that Eric and Caitlin inherited." He had begun speaking of himself in the third person because he was reading from something. "Who wrote that?" Julia asked. "That's not relevant? It sounds like a claim." "It is a claim. Caitlin and I requested a cooperative review." Julia looked through the window at Lori, who was recording a wash temperature. "What are you asking them to do?" "Freeze the agreement and assign it to the farm owners. You signed the depot to me. We signed the building and parcel. We didn't sign away a farm route. Then bring your records. We will." The cooperative placed the next availability payment on administrative hold. It didn't close Route 7 or stop collection, but Julia had to keep operating without knowing whether the next deposit would arrive. The review took place 9 days later in the cooperative meeting room. Morgan sat at the head of a plain rectangular table. Julia and Lori took one side. Eric and Caitlin sat opposite them. Caitlin avoided Julia's eyes. Morgan began by stating what the meeting could decide. "This review concerns one agreement, Route 7. It does not reopen the Reed Estate division. It does not decide the farm lease or sale. We are determining which party qualifies under the cooperative's succession rule." Eric placed a folder on the table. "The route was created to move milk from the Reed farm," he said. "The depot was a facility used by the farm. When our grandfather died, Caitlin and I received the productive farm operation. Julia received the separate building and attached equipment. An income agreement created through farm production should follow the farm." He spoke calmly. He had prepared for this. Caitlin added, "None of us knew an availability agreement might still exist when we signed the division." "That's true," Julia said. Eric looked at her, surprised she had agreed. Morgan asked him to continue. "The controller doesn't create ownership," he said. "It's equipment. The maintenance book doesn't create ownership either. Our grandfather kept records for everything. The reasonable result is to attach the route to the working dairy property that supported it. He had committed fully now. In his version, the depot was only a container. The farm gave the route meaning, so the farm should receive whatever survived. Morgan turned to Caitlin. Is that also your position? Caitlin looked at the deposit statement in front of her. Yes, she said, though the word came slowly. We're asking that the payment and agreement follow the farm. Morgan turned to Julia. Your response? Julia didn't argue about what Benjamin had felt. Nobody could authenticate his private thoughts. She opened the binder. The recorded deed identifies me as lawful owner of the Reed Milk Depot parcel, she said. She placed it on the table. The cooperative master ledger says succession may be claimed by the lawful owner of that parcel. Morgan placed the certified ledger extract beside the deed. Todd Ortiz matched the controller's serial, maintenance record, test acknowledgments, and route sequence to that one entry. Julia added Todd's audit. Lori witnessed Grandpa's renewal practice before I owned the property. Morgan looked at Lori. Tell us what you personally observed. Lori described the monthly test cycles, including the final one she witnessed. She explained where Benjamin kept the maintenance log and why the cooperative acknowledgments appeared beside his entries. Did Benjamin maintain Route 7 through the farm's equipment? Morgan asked. No. The controller and cooling system were at the depot. Did he give the Reed farm priority? No. Eric shifted in his chair. Lori continued. He put the farm through the same schedule as every member. Morgan compared the legal description in the ledger with Julia's deed. Then she read Todd's certification findings aloud. Each item connected to the same agreement. No separate farm route appeared. No second owner existed. The proof didn't punish Eric or reward Julia for taking a risk. It applied the rule Benjamin had kept alive. Morgan closed the ledger. Route 7 succeeds to Julia Reed as lawful owner and operator of the Reed Milk Depot parcel, she said. The administrative hold is removed. The farm has no ownership share in the agreement. It remains eligible to request collection under the same published terms as every cooperative member. Eric stared at the closed ledger. Caitlin looked across the table at Julia, and for the first time, she understood that the thing they had pushed away had never been empty. Eric opened his folder, removed one sheet, and put it back. So that's final? He asked. For the cooperative, Morgan said. Yes. You're accepting a property description over the history of the operation. I'm applying the succession entry your grandfather maintained. The farm produced the milk, and the depot held the agreement. Eric looked at Julia. You knew exactly what you were doing when you signed the division. No, she said. I knew I was accepting the depot. You expect me to believe you had no idea? The controller was dark. The service was off. You saw the building before I did. Caitlin spoke without looking up. She didn't know. Eric turned toward her. We all thought it was a liability, Caitlin said. It was a liability. It still is, Julia said. It also operates a route. Eric closed his folder. You want credit for spending money on a building we would have repaired differently. I don't want credit from you. What do you want? The same thing I wanted before this meeting. Control of my own property and no special terms for the farm. Morgan slid a short form across the table. This acknowledges the review result. Signing doesn't mean you agree with it. It confirms you received it. Caitlin signed first. Eric read the form, then signed beneath her name. Are you withdrawing the claim? Morgan asked. I understand there's no cooperative appeal. That isn't what I asked. Eric held her gaze. I'm not pursuing it further. Morgan wrote that statement into the record. He stood. The farm still needs a collection option, Caitlin said. Eric picked up his folder. Not here. That's your choice, Julia said. He gave her a look that held anger, embarrassment, and something close to fear. The family order he trusted had failed him. Julia had made a decision he couldn't revise, financed work he couldn't supervise, and produced records he couldn't talk around. He wasn't ready to examine his part in that. Don't expect a partnership later, he said. I never offered one. Eric left the room. Caitlin stayed seated. Morgan gathered the cooperative copies. The held payment will be released to the depot account. Route operation continues without interruption. When? Julia asked. Processing should complete tomorrow. Morgan looked at Caitlin. The Reed farm remains a member in good standing. Any collection request goes through the same scheduling system. Caitlin nodded, Lori tucked Benjamin's maintenance book into its document sleeve. She waited for Julia to lock it in the binder case, then followed Morgan into the hall. Julia knew they were giving her and Caitlin a moment. She didn't feel grateful for it. Caitlin folded the review form once, though it didn't need folding. "I'm sorry," she said. Julia stood beside the table. "For what? For treating the depot like something we could push on to you? That's one thing. For asking you to sell after it mattered. That's another." Caitlin winced. "Do I have to list everything correctly? If you want me to know what you're apologizing for." "I'm apologizing for not asking what you wanted. For assuming you'd need us to decide. For telling myself the division was fair because you signed it." Julia waited. Caitlin looked toward the closed door. "And for signing the claim." "Why did you?" "Because the payment made the farm look smaller." It was the most honest thing she had said. Caitlin continued. "I wanted the sale value. Eric wanted control. We both called that protecting Grandpa's operation. You knew the ledger pointed to the depot before the review. I thought there might be room to interpret it in your favor." "Yes." Julia sat across from her. An apology didn't restore the weeks Caitlin had spent supporting, whichever arrangement ended her own uncertainty. It didn't make Julia want to hand her a key or return to the old habit of calling with every success. "I hear you," Julia said. "Do you forgive me?" "Not today." Caitlin's eyes filled, but she nodded. "What happens now?" she asked. "You go home. I run the depot. I meant with us. I don't know." Caitlin pressed the crease flat in the review form. "Can I call you?" "You can call." "I may not answer right away." "That sounds formal." "It is." Caitlin put the paper in her bag. At the door, she stopped. "The coffee I brought that day. You didn't drink it? I forgot about it." "I didn't." Then she left. In the parking lot, Eric's truck was already gone. Caitlin sat in her car for several minutes before starting it. Julia joined Morgan and Lori near the front entrance. "How bad?" Lori asked. "Not fixed." "Good answer." Morgan handed Julia the certified route packet. "Keep the original in a fire-resistant box. The cooperative has copies, but you're responsible for the depot record. I'll get one. You also need to decide whether Lori is a volunteer or an employee." Lori frowned. "We can decide that without you." Morgan ignored her. "A name backup operator needs training records, scheduled availability, and compensation if she's working regular shifts." "I don't need compensation," Lori said. Julia looked at her. "You required a schedule." "That's different?" "No, it isn't. You told me not to assume retirement means waiting by the phone. I did. Then I'm not assuming friendship means free labor." Lori crossed her arms. "You can't afford much. I can afford a fair hourly rate for scheduled backup work. Put it in writing." "I will." Lori nodded. "Then I'll review it." Morgan smiled slightly. "Good. Now you're operating." The held availability payment reached the depot account the following afternoon. Julia divided it before spending any. One part covered electricity, sanitation supplies, and insurance. One part went toward the credit line. She placed the remainder in an equipment reserve. Nothing went into her personal checking account. She kept her warehouse shifts. The depot income gave her room to reduce one early shift each week, but not enough to leave the job. Her older hatchback needed tires. The apartment still had a folding cot, a broken kitchen shelf, and no dependable refrigerator. Route 7 paid. It didn't carry her. The next 2 weeks established a routine. Julia opened before 4 on collection mornings. She recorded temperatures, checked seals, and sent the completed route log to Morgan. Lori covered 3 scheduled mornings and refused 2 unscheduled requests without apologizing. Each time, Julia found another solution. Morgan added a 3rd regular member after reviewing the first operating records. She didn't congratulate Julia. She sent the new schedule and asked whether the depot could meet it. Julia checked cooling capacity, transfer spacing, and wash time before saying yes. Eric didn't call. He moved ahead with the farm lease negotiations and communicated with Caitlin through short emails. When the prospective operator asked about Route 7, Eric forwarded the cooperative's published terms. He didn't mention Julia's name. That was as close as he came to accepting the result. Caitlin called twice. The first time, Julia was unloading sanitation supplies and let it go to voicemail. Caitlin left no message. The second time, Julia answered. "I'm not calling about the review," Caitlin said. "All right, the The farm has milk available for Thursday collection. Have you submitted a route request? I wanted to ask you first. Use the member form. You won't schedule it by phone? I don't schedule anyone by phone. Caitlin was silent. Then she said, "Send me the form. The link is on your cooperative account. I'll find it." The request appeared an hour later. It listed the farm volume, requested time, tank temperature, and owner contact. Caitlin had completed every field. She hadn't asked for first access. Julia placed the Reed farm after an earlier member whose load had already been confirmed. The night before collection, Caitlin sent one message. "We'll be there at 5:20. Julia replied with the bay assignment. At 5:12 the next morning, the first member truck was still transferring when the Reed farm vehicle arrived. Caitlin followed in her car and parked away from the loading path. She entered the office wearing boots and an old farm coat. "We're early," she said. 8 minutes. Do we wait outside?" "Park in the marked lane. I'll signal when Bay 2 is ready." Caitlin looked through the window. "Can I stay here?" "If you keep the blue line clear." She moved beside the desk. The first truck finished. Julia completed the connection wash, checked the bay, and entered the next route code. At 5:22, she signaled the Reed farm driver. Caitlin watched Julia inspect the seal and test the incoming temperature. She didn't interrupt. When the controller accepted the farm code, she stepped closer to the display. "Grandpa used to write those times by hand," she said. "He logged both. I did invoices here one summer. Lori told me." Caitlin looked surprised. She remembers that? She remembers you caught duplicate fuel charges. A small smile appeared. Eric said they were too minor to chase. What did Grandpa say? He made the supplier correct everyone. The transfer pump started. Caitlin's attention moved to the black maintenance book, locked behind the office glass. I wish he'd told us what he was preserving. He may not have known which of us would care. He knew you would. Maybe. Julia didn't turn that possibility into comfort for either of them. The farm load completed without trouble. Julia gave Caitlin a copy of the route receipt. "This is the same rate?" Caitlin asked. "Same published rate. And next week? Submit another request." Caitlin folded the receipt carefully. "I will." She had apologized in the cooperative room. This was the first thing she had done differently afterward. She had used the form, waited her turn, paid the same rate, and let Julia run the depot. It didn't restore trust. It gave trust somewhere practical to begin. Eric's name remained on the farm account, but he didn't come to the depot. He received the route statement and paid the collection charge without protest. He also received no partnership, no private access, and no key. That boundary stayed in place. After the trucks left, Julia closed the bays and began the wash cycle. Caitlin remained by the office door. "Do you need help?" she asked. "Not with the equipment." "What about the apartment?" Julia looked toward the narrow doorway at the back. The caretaker apartment still smelled faintly of fresh plumbing seal and old cupboards. She had slept there for weeks, without making it feel like more than a place to fall down between shifts. "What kind of help?" she asked. "Cleaning, paint, whatever you decide. Lori and I are making a list Saturday." Caitlin nodded. "If you want me there, send me the time." She left without asking again. Julia entered the final wash temperature, shut down the transfer pump, and opened the apartment door. For the first time, she began measuring the rooms for furniture she intended to keep. She wrote the measurements on the apartment wall because the old paint was coming off anyway. The bedroom would hold a full bed if she moved the doorstop. The kitchen had space for a narrow table. The front room needed outlets before it needed furniture. On Friday evening, Julia sent Caitlin one message. Saturday, 8 in the morning, wear old clothes. Caitlin arrived at 7:50 with paint rollers, drop cloths, and breakfast biscuits. She set everything beside the apartment door. "I didn't buy paint," she said. "I figured you'd want to choose it. That was different." In the past, Caitlin would have chosen a color, bought too much of it, and called the decision helpful. Julia opened the paper bag. "Lori will be here in 10 minutes. Does she know I'm coming?" "Yes. Is she all right with it?" She said, "You know how to catch bad invoices." Caitlin smiled. "That sounds like Lori." They ate at the kitchen table. Caitlin didn't mention the farm, the review, or forgiveness. Lori arrived carrying a pry bar and a toolbox. She inspected the apartment before assigning work. "Bedroom carpet comes out," she said. "Cabinet shelf gets replaced. Bathroom grout can be cleaned. Don't paint until you wash the walls." Caitlin picked up the pry bar. Which corner? The loose one. For 3 hours, they pulled stained carpet from the bedroom. The floor beneath was pine, scratched but solid. Julia removed staples. Caitlin rolled carpet into sections. Lori checked the baseboards for dampness. At noon, Caitlin found a dark patch beneath the window. Is that rot? Lori pressed it with a screwdriver. Old water stain. Wood's hard. Julia looked outside at the gutter she had tied up on her first day. A contractor had since repaired it properly. No active moisture, she said. Lori nodded. Then clean it and leave it visible until the next rain. Caitlin reached for the primer. Julia stopped her. We wait. All right. There was no argument. Rain came 4 days later. Julia sat on the bedroom floor during the hardest part and checked the wood every 20 minutes. It stayed dry. She sent Caitlin a photograph. Ready for primer, she wrote. Caitlin replied with a thumbs up and nothing else. The following Saturday, she returned and painted only after Julia opened the can. That became their new pattern. Caitlin offered. Julia decided. Sometimes Julia said no. Caitlin learned not to ask again in a softer voice. They didn't talk about every old hurt. When Caitlin began explaining why she'd wanted the farm sale, Julia told her, I know your reason. Knowing it doesn't change what you did. Caitlin set down her paintbrush. I understand. Then she painted the window trim without asking Julia to comfort her. Lori accepted the backup operator agreement after changing 3 sentences. She wanted a minimum notice period, a limit on monthly shifts, and the right to refuse extra work. Julia accepted all 3. On Lori's first paid morning, she arrived with a timesheet. You made your own? Julia asked. Yours had too much blank space. It was a standard form. It invited nonsense. She worked the full route, recorded her time, and left when the shift ended. Julia didn't ask her to stay for the wash because it wasn't on the schedule. The next morning, Lori came back with tomato sandwiches and helped clean the office without recording an hour. What's this? Julia asked. Lunch. You said friendship didn't mean free labor. I'm not operating equipment. I'm telling you where Benjamin kept the good window scraper. She found it behind the office radiator. Morgan kept the same boundaries. She approved new collection requests when the depot record supported them. She rejected one when the cooling intervals were too tight. We could fit it if the first truck arrives early, Julia said. Does the first member guarantee early arrival? No. Then it doesn't fit. Julia revised the schedule. By the 3rd month, Route 7 had a dependable group of users. The availability payment arrived in the same amount each cycle. Julia used it for operating costs, debt, and equipment reserve. Collection fees covered supplies and part of her scheduled labor. She reduced another warehouse shift, but didn't quit. The depot still had slow weeks, and the backup cooling plan depended on another facility. She wanted 6 months of records before changing anything else. The $31,000 cost remained visible in her bank statements. The credit line balance fell gradually. Her older hatchback received 4 new tires, one at a time. The apartment gained a second-hand bed, a repaired kitchen cabinet, and a refrigerator that hummed louder than the depot compressor. Julia kept it because it stayed cold. She moved Benjamin's work jacket from the office chair to a hook beside the apartment door. The peppermint wrapper remained in one pocket. She put the carriage bolts in a labeled drawer near the loading floor. The office reopened with 2 desks, working lights, a bulletin board, and a coffee pot. Drivers used the second desk to sign route sheets. Dairy operators stopped in to confirm schedules or wait through transfer. Nobody called the building abandoned anymore. Caitlin brought Julia a copy in a plain black frame. I thought you might want it in the office, she said. Julia read the line, then looked at Caitlin. Everyone? It's a headline. You wrote to the paper. I answered questions. You could have warned me. I should have. Caitlin started to take the frame back. Julia stopped her. Leave it. She hung it near the route map, not behind her desk. Eric saw it the next time the farm used the depot. He read the headline without comment. He had not apologized. He still believed the properties would have produced more money together. He also stopped calling Julia's ownership temporary. The real test came during a warm week when the farm's regular haul truck developed a cooling problem. Eric called Julia at 3:30 in the morning. We need a late collection slot, he said. Submit an emergency request. I'm telling you now, I need the tank temperature and estimated arrival. The driver has those. Then the driver can enter them. We don't have time for a form. It takes 2 minutes. Julia, we could lose the load. She was already in the office preparing the first scheduled collection. She checked the route board. A safe opening existed after the second member if Morgan approved the emergency sequence. I'm not refusing the load, she said. I'm requiring the information. You know the farm. I know the equipment here. I don't know the condition of your milk until you report it. Eric went quiet. Months earlier, Julia would have heard his silence as a command to give in. Now, it was only silence. The driver will submit it, he said. The request arrived 3 minutes later. Julia forwarded it to Morgan with the revised route sequence. Morgan approved the emergency collection under the published terms. The Reed farm truck waited behind 2 scheduled loads. Eric came with it. He stayed in the office while Julia tested the incoming temperature. The milk remained inside standard, though close to the limit. Julia accepted the load, cooled it, and transferred it safely to the cooperative hall. Afterward, Eric stood beside the blue line with the route receipt in his hand. You could have moved us ahead, he said. No. The first truck had plenty of cooling margin. It had a confirmed time. He folded the receipt. Grandpa would have made me wait too. Yes. That was the nearest Eric came to accountability. He looked toward the apartment where warm light showed through the clean curtains. You live here full time now? Most nights. He nodded once. The gutter repair looks good. Then he left. Julia didn't follow him outside. She didn't turn the comment into an invitation or the emergency collection into proof that everything was repaired between them. The farm had used the route. The route had served it fairly. That was enough for that morning. Caitlin continued booking the farm's loads. Sometimes she stayed for coffee. Sometimes she left with the driver. She never used the office key because Julia never gave her one. At the end of summer, the farm lease was signed. Eric kept the property intact, and Caitlin received regular income without forcing a sale. Neither outcome depended on owning the depot. Caitlin brought 1 box from the farmhouse after the lease operator moved into the main house. Inside were Benjamin's old kitchen clock, 2 clean dish towels, and the glass bowl she had claimed during sorting. I thought the bowl should be here, she said. You wanted it. I still do. Then keep it. Caitlin rested one hand on the box. Could we use it here? They washed it and placed it on Julia's kitchen table. Caitlin filled it with peaches from a roadside stand. She didn't ask whether that meant she was forgiven. The depot's formal reopening took place on an ordinary Monday. There was no ceremony. Morgan added the office to the cooperative's active location list. Lori replaced the temporary cleaning chart with a permanent one. Julia removed the 60-day sheet from beside the controller. She kept it in the binder. The first line showed where she had started. The circled 54th showed what it had cost to continue, the 6 blank days after it remained blank. That afternoon, Julia finished the apartment baseboards. She unpacked her remaining boxes and put her clothes in the bedroom closet. Her old rental key went into an envelope for the landlord. At 5, Lori arrived for her scheduled backup shift and found Julia carrying the folding cot outside. Throwing it away, she asked. Cleaning it? A driver may need it during a weather delay. You're keeping everything? Only useful things. That's what Benjamin said. Morgan came in with the next week's manifests. Caitlin delivered clean towels for the apartment and left before supper. Eric's farm request appeared through the member system at the proper time. The office filled with the small sounds Julia had once heard beside Benjamin. Paper moving across a desk, a cooler fan starting, a key returning to its hook. The place no longer needed her siblings to regret giving it away. It needed temperatures recorded, schedules honored, bills paid, and people welcomed through the correct door. Julia could do those things. If stories about young people rebuilding a life after family betrayal matter to you, subscribe and return for the next inheritance story. That evening, the last collection truck returned clean from the cooperative wash bay. The driver parked it beside the cooling platform for the early route. Lori finished her timesheet and left through the office. Morgan's manifests waited in their tray. In the apartment, the refrigerator hummed beside the bowl of peaches. Julia checked the controller one final time. Route 7 showed ready for morning collection. She locked the filing drawer, hung the brass keys in order, and opened the office door to let out the day's heat. Light spread across the blue line and reached the loading apron. Then Julia turned on the depot's porch light above the open office, while Route 7's clean truck cooled beside her home.